IB Nation, welcome back to another edition, the first edition of Irish Breakdown Podcast in the year 2023. We had to kick off 2023 events with the OGs, man. So I had to get you on the show today.
Yes.
We're going to have a little bit of fun today. So we're going to kind of do wrapping up the 2022 season is kind of what we're going to do this week. And so we're going to have some different aspects of that. Today is going to be a really fun sort of an award show. We're going to talk about who we thought were the top players and best moments and biggest wins and turning points and all that kind of stuff from the season. Later today at 6 o'clock, we'll have an IB Nation sports talk show. You'll see a lot of Vince today. And then at 8 o'clock tonight, Vince and I are going to do our upon further review of the bowl game. We have a lot to talk about the bowl game, but honestly, we were both pretty exhausted yesterday. Me from travel, Vince from some other family stuff. He had stuff going on. So we're going to move that tonight. We'll kind of put a bow on the bowl game because there's a lot to talk about with the bowl game once you break down the film. So we'll talk about that tonight. And then tomorrow, we're going to get into sort of grading the coach. Well, we'll kind of look at what we learned about Marcus Freeman as a head coach, like what we know,
right?
That we can say definitively what we learned about him this year as a head coach, that moving forward is going to be the foundation of what he can do. Then we will kind of get into sort of a breakdown of what needs to come next for Marcus Freeman and this football team. And we're going to look specifically for him and the manner in which he's building the team, not like they got to get better quarterback. That conversation will come. It's going to be more about Marcus Freeman as the head coach. And then we'll kind of grade the assistant coaches. So we'll do some of that this week. And then, of course, Friday, Vince, mailbag time.
Can't wait.
So that's going to be our week. And then Saturday, we may bring back a show that we did over the summer with me and Sean Davis. We'll see if that's going to start this week or next week. That what was it? It was RTCF show, right? Recruiting Team College Football. So we're going to try to bring that back this weekend as well. Ryan Roberts is down in Texas right now for the Army All-American Bowl. It's to the All-American Bowl now, Vince. They got rid of the Army part, which is lame. But he'll be down there. So he's actually every night, he's going to have updates on the board. He's going to have articles updating how practice went. And then every night he's going to record a show that we'll publish at night. That is going to be about 15, 20 minutes, just kind of breaking down what he saw from the Notre Dame kids at the Army, at the All-American Bowl today. So obviously there's 7 Notre Dame players down there. 3 of them are likely not going to participate. Charles Jagasol is going to have a little off-season surgery. Rico Flores is coming off of an injury. I'm not sure about Kenny Minchie and whether or not he's going to perform. But we'll still have plenty to discuss from that. So that's a busy week, man. We're diving right into 2023 head first, man. And
I was just going to say, it was funny last night, you and I were on the phone and we were talking. It was just like, there's almost like old times. Like, okay, what's this week going to look like? Okay, we're going to do this show this week, this show this day, this show this day.
Yeah.
It was awesome. Like, I'm really looking forward to this week. I was just looking at the week. I was like, man, I don't have a whole lot going on.
Yeah.
Well, that's not the case anymore. So I'm fired up, get to do a bunch of shows with you. And it's the OG, man. Like, this is going to be a lot of fun. I'm stoked. 3 shows today. We'll see if I have the same feeling. By about 10 o'clock tonight. But
and there's just so much to talk about and so much to wrap up. And that's going to be the fun part of what we're going to do is we're going to dive into this. We'll get into replacing our loads about guys that are being gone. We'll talk about breaking down the offense and defense areas that got to get better or got to improve.
And there's going to be a ton of news, I'm sure.
Tons and tons of stuff. So
I mean, it's going to be fun.
January is going to be a blast. And so we're not going to talk about it all in this game. So here's what we're going to ask you all to do. In the chat, we're going to kind of go through these, and what we would like you all to do is stick to the topics of what we're discussing today, because we want to have some fun with you guys, engaging with you. So we're going to kind of go down each. We're going to start offense, then go defense, and then we'll kind of hand out a specialist of the year. Then we'll go team MVP. Then we'll talk about some team awards, biggest win, toughest loss, turning point, biggest play, all this kind of stuff. But what we want y'all to do is we want you guys to stay with us, right? So don't be chatting about the games that are going on. Those are fun. I mean, you can a little bit, but like, we want y'all to kind of interact with us. If you have mailbag questions, just put mailbag on there, and then you can leave that at the end because we'll have mailbag at the end. But we want to kind of hear from y'all too, Vince, and that's what we want to do is we want to kind of, here's the topic and here's the criteria, and we'll make our picks, but we want to hear what your picks are as well.
Absolutely.
And that's going to be a lot of fun. So I love the comment down there about haven't listened to y'all all year. It's very true. Come on
back.
So Vince, we're gonna start off with the offense, and on offense, we're gonna start off we'll finish with the most outstanding player. But we're gonna start off with kind of best newcomer this year, and for us, newcomer is a true freshman or a transfer. It is not a redshirt freshman because that guy is not a newcomer to the football team. And offensively, Vince, this year, there weren't really a lot of options. There weren't a lot of guys that kind of played this year.
I'm sitting there and I'm trying to think about true freshmen or transfers, either one, that played offense this year.
There's only 3. It's the 2 tight ends and Tobias Merriweather. That's it.
And therefore, it makes this one kind of easy, at least in my opinion, on where to go. And I thought about the tight ends, but they played, but they didn't play enough to really make an impact. And frankly, you could say the same thing about Tobias Merriweather, but the impact that he made for me is he scored a touchdown. And it was granted, he had 1 catch. He had 1 touchdown.
Big catch.
It was a big catch, and it was in a loss. What it ended up being a loss, but at the time, it was a huge catch. And, we were hoping that was going to be the beginning of, the rest of the season for him. And then, of course, he got injured. And then I don't know anything. It looked like he wasn't 100% in the bowl game. So he didn't have any catches there. So he ended the year.
He looked good early in that game. And if you look at what happened on the play where he was open in the end zone for what should have been a touchdown, and the ball got thrown low and he dove. It looked like he jammed his knee up and he just didn't run right after that. But before that, he was running pretty good.
Yeah.
He just wasn't running right after that. But the reality is they didn't really have anybody else to throw the ball to at that
That's
point.
A fact. And I just we're talking about impact. We're talking about, he obviously made an impact in the chat. I mean, let's be honest. It's all we ever heard, was Tobias this, Tobias that. So for me, most outstanding newcomer has to be Tobias Merriweather. Number 1, for lack of choices. And number 2, he did score a touchdown. He's 100% as far as catching the ball and scoring a touchdown. So that's mine.
Just so people know, there will be guys that will win multiple awards. We are going to do our best to kind of pick who we think were the best at those categories. So you are able to pick a player at multiple positions. So we will not have an offensive MVP and a defensive MVP. We would have a team MVP.
Right.
We're doing most outstanding on offense and defense. And we'll have some other reasons why we're not doing valuable, because we have things like the best leader and things like that. So there will be multiple guys. So offensively, Vince, I'm totally fine with Tobias. I'm going to go with Holden Stace, though.
Okay.
And here's why. He was sort of the last man standing, right? I mean, he's the one guy that stayed healthy all year. I thought he really improved as a blocker as the year went on. I think you could have made a case for Eli Raritan because how good his blocking was, but he didn't finish the year, and he didn't make any impact in the pass game, right? And so his impact was in a very short period of time because he didn't play early. Then he played a couple games, got hurt, and then he was out. So I can't in good faith go with him. Tobias, similar thing. If Tobias would not have had the concussion issue down the stretch and missed the last few games, I might have gone with him because I think he would have caught passes in there.
I do too.
But I'm giving Holden Stace some high marks for staying healthy. I'm giving Holden Stace for high marks for continuing to improve in the pass game. He had a very clutch catch against BYU, if you remember. So he didn't score, but he had the same number of catches as him. And didn't he catch a 2-point conversion against BYU? Am I misremembering that?
I'm not sure.
I thought I remember him catching a 2-point conversion that game, but I could be completely wrong on that one. But I thought I remember. I'm looking up the box score now. So 2-point conversion failed for Notre Dame. So that's why they had that one. So I just remember him catching a ball near the goal line, but it must have been the play he had in that game. But he did catch a very clutch pass that game. I thought his blocking improved as the year went on, and so that's why I'm going with Holden Stace. And like you said, there weren't a lot of options, right? I think the guy that would have got the award if he didn't get hurt was Jadarian Price.
Yeah, I agree with
that would have been the guy for me. I think it would have been Jadarian Price if not for the injury, because he might have been the top back. Look, I talked to a couple sources that are very close to the offensive side of the ball who said that during spring he was their best running back,
which is scary.
Better than Tyree, better than now Estime was banged up, right? Because remember he was kind of limited. Logan Diggs was a little bit limited. But he was their best running back in the spring. So I think it probably would have been him, but I am going with Holden Stace.
Okay.
We're going to stay on offense, Vince, and we're going to go with the breakout player. And this can be a guy that it can be a newcomer if it's appropriate, but it's sort of a guy that didn't really see a whole lot from in the past that kind of became sort of a difference maker, a guy that kind of, put his name on the map this year. for Notre Dame. Again, we're kind of going with the offense here, Vince. So who is your breakout player for 2022?
I'm still on the
Again,
fence about.
real quick,
Go ahead.
folks.
Yes.
We are talking about the offense first.
Yes.
Then we'll do the defense.
Correct.
So it's like every answer is Benjamin Morrison so far from people. This is the offense. Okay. This is the offense. So I just want to remind y'all, we're talking offense here. So who is your breakout player, Vince, on offense?
This one for me, I'm on the fence between two guys, and I'll tell you why. So my first inclination was to go with Logan Diggs, and he obviously ran the ball last year. I mean, he had 52 carries for 230 yards, which is great. I mean, that's awesome. But he averaged 28 yards a game. This year, 822 yards, averaged almost 70 yards a game. I felt like his game rounded out much better this year, than it did last year. He had 6 catches last year. He had 10 catches this year. The difference is he had 4 times the amount of yards this year as he did last year. I just felt like he became more of a complete back. I felt like he became more of a guy that you can count on. At times, he was the number 1 back for Notre Dame. So I had him as my breakout. And my other breakout I had, and I know this is cheating having 2 guys, but it was Joe Alt. Joe Alt, granted, he's not going to be able to come up with stats, except for like sacks given up, things like that. But he was on a bunch of All-America lists, all of these different things. We saw a lot of what that could be last year. And I think he broke out this year. I mean, he was a freshman All-American last year, but he was a legit All-American, most of the time second team, but he was a legit All-American this year. And so, as a sophomore, as a true sophomore. So to me, that's also a definition of a breakout player. So kind of had 2. I know that's cheating, but I had Diggs and Alt.
I was torn. See, Alt to me, I think your criteria is perfectly fine. I think if you're going to go with one of those 2 guys, if you're going to count Alt as part of a breakout player, I think it's hard for me to not be the choice, but I didn't have him as a breakout because I thought he was so good last year. Yeah. And because he was a freshman All-American and there was, we kind of anticipated him kind of growing, at least for me. So my expectations for Joe Alt, maybe unfairly, were that he would become kind of what he became.
I know, right?
So that might be unfair.
I get that though. I get where you're coming from.
So it might be unfair, but that's the reason he's not in it for me. It came down to 3 guys. It came down to Audric Estime and Logan Diggs, and it came down to Jaden Thomas. Because, Estime even, we only saw him really in 2 games last year as a ball carrier, played a bunch. We didn't see anything of Jaden Thomas last year. And by the end of the year, he was their best receiver. Just from a consistency standpoint. So it was really, to me, it was those 3. I'm going to try to not give one guy all the awards, which is going to be hard. So
I know.
There's going to be some kind of like, well, how can you pick a guy there, but then you pick this guy over here? So just keep in mind with some of these, I'm going with some different players, but I'm going to have to go with Audric Estime on this one.
Okay.
Just because, and I also know why you're not picking him here because you have him for another category. But for me,
right.
Logan Diggs, it's almost kind of like with Logan Diggs, I didn't pick him almost unfairly because number 1, I'm going to have him in a different category. But number 2, it's kind of like we saw glimpses of this last year. I think it's just more of he was used more this year. I think that was kind of really the difference for me was, okay, we just saw his role increase this year than it was last year. With Audric, it was kind of like, well, we really don't know what to expect from him because because of all the other guys at the position, and we didn't see him a whole lot last year. And for him to break out, he led the team in rushing this season with 920 yards, averaged 5.9 yards per carry, which is almost a full yard greater than Logan Diggs. He had 11 touchdowns, rushing touchdowns, and he had 12 total touchdowns. Kid was almost a 1,000-yard rusher. And would have had 12 touchdowns if he didn't have his own little fumble. He had some fumbling issues at one point in time, but also I love the fact that he bounced back from that and never put the ball on the ground again. He got benched against, what was it, UNLV? That he got benched against them? Was that the game he got benched for a fumble? And came back from that just a completely different player. And that says something to me too, Vince. When you're a young player and you face adversity, and you're going to hear us talk about this a lot this week. He faces adversity. He comes back the next game. He only has 3 carries for 17 yards against UNLV because of the fumble. Comes back the very next game, goes for 20 carries, 123 yards, 2 touchdowns. Comes out against Clemson, goes for 104 yards and a touchdown. And it's kind of like, that's what I want to see.
Well, and
you get benched because your mistakes, and you come back the next 2 weeks and you have your 2 best games of the year. That tells me that's a kid that's got it up here and here, not just the physical talent, but he's got the mind and he's got the heart to be an outstanding player. And I thought it was, because people said the Stanford was one of the games. He fumbled against North Carolina. He fumbled against Stanford. It was the UNLV fumble that was kind of the final straw where the staff pulled him out and didn't put him back in.
Right.
That's what we're referring to.
And I will also say, if I'm not mistaken, the first play of the game, the following game where they put him back in, they handed him the ball.
First two plays.
It was like, okay, because we talked about that a lot going into that game, how we wanted him to get back in there. But, if we're talking about last year's staff, that kid is in the doghouse the rest of the year.
We don't see him again.
What does that look like this year? I mean, there was a lot of question marks around Audric Estime and what the coaching staff was going to do with him. First 2 plays of the game, they feed him the ball. I was like, okay, this is a different staff. And so it said a lot to me about the staff. It said a lot to me about Estime and what they were able to do with him. And you're 100% right. The reason I don't have him here in this category is because I have him in another category,
pretty big
as
one.
as Jaden Thomas as well. He's in a different category for me too. So I tried to spread the love a little bit, but I have no problem with you picking Audric here. I mean, he was a workhorse stud for this offense. I mean, this offense isn't what it is without Audric Estime, period.
Yes. That's absolutely correct. So, Vince, let's go to the next category, and that is Notre Dame's best big man. This can be a offensive lineman or a tight end, and let's just kind of dive into it. So, I think it's kind of, for me, I'm going to do with this one what you're going to do for another award. So I'm going to let you kick off with the best big man for Notre Dame award this year.
You can say a lot about the offensive line and what they did for Notre Dame. And obviously I talked about Joe Alt and what he did. And I mean, you can talk about Jarrett Patterson. You can talk about the improvement of Zeke Correll. There's a million different routes that you could go with this. And I would not have much of an argument. But any category that allows you to have the tight end involved, I'm sorry, I have to go with Michael Mayer. And he is my best big man. I mean, he is arguably, maybe not even arguably, the best tight end to come out of a school that has produced the best tight ends ever. And that's
certainly the most prolific.
I mean,
right.
Absolutely. Yeah. And look, are there things that he needs to work on in his game? No doubt about it. But I think he got better at those things as the year went on. It was disappointing, some of his blocking at the beginning of the season.
It's hard to say he's got a lot more to improve on by the end of the year. That's the thing you love, right? Because you don't see a lot of guys that are established All-American players that continue to work on their game
on this team. And he is also the most decorated guy on this team. And look, Marcus Freeman has said this on multiple occasions, when you can have that person, the hardest worker and the best player, as the same person, I mean, it's just like you just kind of sit back and you just watch it happen. I mean, that's the best thing to have as a coach, right? So, again, anytime you can have the tight end involved in a topic, I'm probably going to take Michael Mayer, and I could make an argument for somebody else, but I would be fooling myself. So it's Michael Mayer for me.
Yes, you could say Michael Mayer, and it would make a lot of sense based on the criteria. But I'm going to have him for multiple other ones, and I just didn't want this to be like the Michael Mayer award show.
And that's fair. I get that.
So I'm actually going to go Joe Alt, and I probably should have changed the criteria to just have it be alignment is what I should have done, just to make it easier for that. But I'm going Joe Alt because, again, first or second team All-American across the board, as steady as you're going to find. We'll talk a little bit about this in the show tonight, but I actually thought the South Carolina game was one of the worst games he played all year.
Agreed.
But in the second half, in the fourth quarter, he made 2 huge blocks in the run game that sprung runners open. And it's kind of like, that's what you want to see from our great players. Even when he's not on his A game, he still make them impact plays.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I saw from Joe Alt. But just the steadiness from him all year was just really impressive for such a young player. And I had a chance to walk past his dad on Saturday or Friday going into the game, and you're like, okay, that's where he gets his height from. Obviously his dad was an all-pro in the NFL, but just the steadiness was impressive to me. And he got better and better as a run blocker as the year goes on. And he's going to continue to improve as a run blocker just because he's going to get stronger. When you look at him in the face, he still looks like a baby.
Oh, he does.
Absolutely. I mean, he might even still be a teenager because he's only a true sophomore.
So much more width on that frame, too.
Yeah. He'll probably add another 5 to 10 pounds at least, and he's already 317.
Right.
So, because he's just got a massive
He looks
frame,
like an athletic.
Yeah, he is.
He's just tall and he's athletic. He doesn't look.
He was 240 as a junior in high school, and he's up to 317 now. So, in a 3-year period, less than a 3-year period, he added 70 pounds, and he didn't miss a beat athletically.
Right.
That's called great DNA. And it's also called gaining weight the right way. He didn't put fat on. He got up to 270 as a senior, didn't slow down at all. So he's just a really impressive kid, Vince. I mean, it's hard not to go with him here. If, again, that was on me, I should have made it a O-line award.
If that was the case,
you're correct. When you put the tight end in there, it's like, how do you not pick Michael Mayer? Well, I'm not picking Michael Mayer because I have him for several other awards, and I want to use him then. And I don't want this to be the Michael Mayer award show.
Best offensive lineman, it's Joe Alt, hands down.
Easily.
I mean, no doubt about it.
Let's move on to the next category, Vince, and that is the best skill player at Notre Dame. It could be quarterback, running back, or wide receiver. And it really looks at trying to find a guy that impacts the game in a lot of ways, just the impact players for the offense, Vince. So let's go there. Let's go with the best skill player for the Notre Dame offense.
So this is quarterback, running back, or wide receiver, right?
Yep.
Now, see, and again, I don't want to repeat everything because this is a person that we've already talked about, but I will go and I will talk about him a little bit. This is where I have Audric Estime. I have him as my top skill player because he's, like I said, this offense isn't this offense without him. And you could say that about Michael Mayer, but his tight end is not part of this category. So quarterback, running back, wide receiver, I'm going with the most impactful running back that Notre Dame had, and it's Audric Estime. I mean, when he was on, and he is a load to bring down. I mean, it's almost tempting as an offensive coordinator to just kind of go back and forth with Logan Diggs and Chris Tyree in the first half, and then it's like halftime comes and you come out and they're, a little winded, they're a little, the defense is a little broken down, whatever, and then you bring number 7 into the huddle. It's like, okay, where do we tap out? You know what I mean? Like,
and they did that early in the year, Vince.
Right.
I mean, that was Estime's role early in the year.
It's like, where do we tap out here?
Yeah.
Where's the white flag? Because there's no way. Right. I mean, he would just punish defenses in the second half and the fourth quarter. So, I mean, again, the other running backs are really, really good for Notre Dame. There's no doubt about it. But Audric Estime is just a different guy. He's my top skill player.
I'm going with Logan Diggs here. And the reason I'm going with Logan Diggs is because I'm looking at the ability for him to impact the game in so many different ways. And we're going to talk about some of the plays he made this year, Vince, but you're talking about a guy that this season also not only had over 800 yards rushing, right? He was their number 2 leading rusher this year at 822 yards rushing. You look at the ability for him to kind of make an impact in the run game, ability to make an impact in the pass game. Audric Estime this year had 3 100-yard seasons. Logan Diggs this year had 3 100-yard games. Or he had, I said seasons, 100-yard games. He had a big game against Clemson, also had over 100 yards. Everybody talks about how good Estime was in that game, and he was. But Logan Diggs rushed for more yards in that game. Now, he was their leading rusher that game, not Audric Estime. He was huge, great against Boston College, and he was absolutely huge in the South Carolina game. They both were, but Logan obviously made plays in the run and pass game. So I'm going with Diggs as the best all-around skill player on offense. And you could have made a case for Chris Tyree because he was so impactful in the run and pass game, but he just didn't do enough in either category to be there for me. And so that's why I'm going with Logan Diggs here. Just the all-around nature of what he did and the fact that, you look at his production and the reality is he basically missed 3 games. I mean, he carried the ball 4 times against Ohio State. He was clearly not himself. He carried the ball 7 times for 7 yards against Marshall. He was clearly not himself. And then he just sat out the Cal game with an illness. I just think he needed to get his shoulder right. Comes back against North Carolina, and that was a game where you kind of started to see, okay, they're going to use this cat a lot different.
Yeah.
He rushes for 50 yards, and then he catches 3 passes for 65 yards. You saw it a little bit against USC as well. He couldn't really get the run game going. He only had 34 yards rushing, but then he had 30-some receiving yards. And then in the bowl game, he has 81 receiving yards and 90 rushing yards. I mean, it just that all-around nature is why I'm going with Logan Diggs for my best skill player.
I think we can both agree that the best skill player needs to come out of the running back.
At no point in time so far have I argued with you that, no, it should be this guy.
No. I get that. I think it's great. Yeah. I don't know if you and I have agreed yet, but there's reasons for it. You know what I mean? Yep. And you have guys at different spots, and I have guys at different spots.
Right.
And that's
fun. What makes this fun.
And
that's why I kind of try to leave this as broad as possible with some of the criteria, just to have some fun with it.
Absolutely.
So let's kind of go with so that was kind of best skill and specific things. We're going to kind of get into some other aspects of the Player of the Year's awards now. And let's go with who is the best leader for the Notre Dame offense this year. We have a little bit of a difference on this one. I want you to kick it off and kind of talk about, because this is the one that I'm going to somewhat push on just a little bit. But who is your best leader?
Oh, you can push, and I understand. I know why you're going to push on it.
Yeah.
Because you're going to push on it because of the Marshall game, and
Bingo. And the fact that he missed the game, right?
Of the Marshall game, or the post game of the Marshall game, and I totally get that. I get that. I come at this, and of course we're talking about Jarrett Patterson, the guard for the Notre Dame offense, and the reason I go there, I was going to go Michael Mayer on this, and I was like, you know what? Again, I don't want this to be the Michael Mayer show. I want to think outside the box just a little bit. And I went with Jarrett Patterson because, this is going to sound like it's a slight towards Isaiah Foskey and it's a slight towards Michael Mayer, but part of it was because he played in the game on Friday. Right. And that means a lot to me. And I know that's a super old school way to look at things. I get it. And I will be the first one to admit it. That is not 2022 thinking. I get it. But it's how I think. And he wanted to play in this game. And he never thought twice about it, at least based on what he said in the press conference. He's like,
he was pretty clear about that, Vince.
Yeah. He's like, this is another opportunity for me to play with my guys. There's no chance I wasn't going to play in this game. And that I literally sat back and I smiled when I heard that quote. And I was like, yes, that's what a leader is. That's who I want on my team. And I like the fact that a leader can come from the offensive line. I think those guys are just steady. They work hard. They're guys. Now, I know where you're going to push back, and I was.
Well, let me just kind of say mine.
Yeah, please,
let me actually give my pushback.
Okay.
My pick's Michael Mayer, and I've got a lot of reasons why. My pushback for you is I'm not pushing back to say Jarrett Patterson wasn't a leader. He was. It's just when you're talking about specifics, there's got to be some things that become deal breakers for you, and that was one for me. That was he was the leader of the line, but the not only the way he acted after the Marshall game, but like you were one of the problems in the fourth quarter of that game.
No doubt about that.
Right. And so, but he did bounce back from that and he did play in the game and I give him credit for that. But to get through the year, the best leader on the entire team to me was Michael Mayer. And to me, a leader is someone who shows out in several ways. Number one is impact player. He was clearly an impact player. He led with his play. When they needed a play to be made, Michael Mayer made it. He led with his work ethic. I mean, like you said, hardest work on the team. I've told stories about how I've talked to freshmen. I talked to a freshman of a parent of a freshman on defense who did not play this year in any meaningful manner. And he told me about a time during the summer where Michael Mayer knocks on the door of his kid and says, "Hey, you're working out with me today." And just showing leadership, like showing a young buck here, who
I love
he
that
saw,
story,
he sees leadership potential in this kid. This is how I think it happened. I think Michael Mayer saw this kid as a potential leader down the road. Mm-hmm. And he wanted to say, okay, I'm going to push this kid. I'm going to show this kid what it means to be a Notre Dame football player and a leader at Notre Dame. And that's why I think he did it, because I think Michael Mayer understands the legacy he's leaving. I think too many young people today don't appreciate the history of the game, of their school. It's just about me and getting mine and just the now.
Especially nowadays. Good Lord. Yeah.
And I think Michael Mayer is one of those old school souls that understands the legacy that he stepped into and the legacy that he's leaving behind. He understands that my impact in Notre Dame has to go, if I'm doing this right, has to go beyond my 3 years in South Bend. What am I leaving for the next generation of Notre Dame players? And that's, to me, why he gets the edge. from a leadership standpoint. And he was the guy that was willing to call out teammates during the season. He was the guy willing to say, hey, look, this isn't good enough. And that's part of a leader too. And I think he wasn't alone, but he kind of just hit all the marks for me.
Yeah.
And I don't fault him for not playing in the ball game. I'm not a fan of people not playing in the ball game. He's the only player. I think Isaiah Foskey should have played. Yeah. Bro, if Will Anderson's good enough to play, or is not too good to play in the ball game, you are not too good to play in the ball game, okay? And I thought he still had a lot to prove. With Michael Mayer, honestly, because he left everything out there for this team this year, I was like, you know what? I get it.
I get it.
And I also felt like there was an aspect of, I actually think it was better for the team that he didn't play because it forced them to look to their next guys.
I
don't think that was the case for Isaiah Foskey.
When we're looking big picture and we're looking at this offense, and when I was looking at the offense going into this game, there was part of me that was happy that Michael Mayer wasn't playing. No doubt about it, especially
from a looking forward to next year standpoint.
And then that's what I'm referring to, like going into spring and going into what this offense could look like minus Michael Mayer. Like we got an opportunity to see that on Friday, right? And I think that was really, really good, not only for whoever's going to be quarterback, but I think it was also good for the other wide receivers. I think it was good for the tight ends. Like it was good for everybody on the offense. I think it was even good for Tommy Rees, if we're being honest, because he didn't have that security. Look, you've been part of a play calling situation where your input is valued, right? There is instinct when it's nut cutting time. It's like, we got to go to 87. Like, I mean, you call play for your best player, whoever that happens to be. That's a fallback. Now, good play callers go against that tendency, and that works out, that kind of a thing.
Yeah.
But man, when you need a play to be made, it's hard to go against a guy that is going to make a play 9 times out of 10, right? And so I think it was even good for Tommy Rees not to have Michael Mayer in this game.
Yeah, I agree. Although I have a feeling that Tommy Rees might have been able to use him in some ways in this game. But you worry about would Tyler Buckner have looked at him as a security blanket, and he didn't have that in this game. And that's really what it kind of comes down to for me.
Yes.
So we talked about the leader, Vince. Let's talk about the biggest surprise. Now, this is one of those ones that could be a positive or negative. Most of this show is going to be about positivity, but this one is one where a negative aspect could come into play. So, Vince, as we look at what the biggest surprise from a player standpoint was this season, let's go with your pick.
So I was tempted to take a turn to negative town on this one, but I decided to stay positive. And this one may surprise some people as far as the biggest surprise. I went with Deion Colzie, okay? And then when you look at his stats, they're not amazing by any stretch of the imagination. He started one game, he had 9 catches, 192 yards, 1 touchdown. He averaged 16 yards a game, okay? I mean, those aren't numbers of a number one receiver. But I felt like the reason I picked him here is because I think he was forgotten about by a lot of people. A lot of fans forgot about Deion Colzie, in my opinion, going into the season, because they had their new toy and Tobias Merriweather. You had Jaden Thomas, who everybody was talking about in the offseason as well, because he had such good bowl practice. Remember that? Remember the conversation we had about his bowl practices and how
Vince,
show out in the Fiesta Bowl?
75% of the people in this chat had written off Deion Colzie after this his first spring game.
Yes, exactly. And I felt like
he wasn't an early enrollee, right?
Correct.
I don't believe so. This past spring was his first spring game. People were writing him off.
People were writing him off, and
even though he would have had 2 touchdowns if the quarterback didn't miss him by a mile on 2 throws.
Well, and he had, when he was out there as a true freshman, the couple times he got out there in the fall, he looked lost. I don't blame Deion Colzie for that. Okay, there's a partial percentage where you can blame him, and that's fine. I blame coaching. I do. And so it felt like this year was a bit of a situation for him where he was able to have a redemption year. And so he was a surprise for me in a good way. And I felt like he started to become a bit of a third down security blanket a little bit for Drew Pine there. The second half of the season, made some plays on third down. I mean, all of a sudden he was the guy to go to, not named Michael Mayer, on third down. And I thought he did a good job. Now, he didn't have any catches in the South Carolina game. Okay. I mean, that's fine. I get that. But at the same time, I felt like he took a nice step forward where he is going to be a nice building block for this wide receiving core. Yeah. He's going to be a junior. I really was intrigued by the Deion Colzie, Tobias Merriweather package that they started
Jane
running.
Thomas in the slot.
I like that group.
That needs to be the starting lineup next year. In my
completely agree with you. And so let's see where this goes. But he was a nice surprise for me for this season.
Yeah. I'm going to go with a little bit of a negative one. I really anticipated Lorenzo Styles was going to be their best receiver this year. I thought he was going to have a 700-800 plus year season. And then he starts the season off like, yep, I was right. Nailed that one with a 54-yard game against Ohio State, and then did nothing positive the rest of the year. I mean, he really didn't. It was really, I've never seen, I mean, I've heard of sophomore slumps, Vince, but for Lorenzo, it was really strange to see how he performed. And then to him to just disappear really in the last 8 games, to the point where the only time he can really make a play in the second half of the year is if they threw him a ball behind the line of scrimmage, because that's the only thing he could catch. I mean, it was the drops. It was the apathy. Yeah. I mean, you and I are sitting there in the Marshall game, and I'm like, how many times did I look at you and like, did you watch him run that route? He's jogging. Like, he knows he's not going to get the ball, so he's just half-assing it off the line of scrimmage. Yeah. Like, it was so disappointing to see that. And then the drops got in his head.
Yeah.
I thought he played hard against South Carolina. That was a positive. I thought he played hard against South Carolina, and that was good to see, but I don't think he caught a pass.
He had one go off his face because I think there was a little bit too much steam on it, but he still should have caught it.
Well, was that him or Stace?
I thought that was him at the very beginning of the game.
There was one behind him on the second play of the game. One was behind him that maybe he should have caught, but it was also not a very good ball. And as a former quarterback, if a guy's got to make, as a former quarterback, that's on me. As a receivers coach, I'm like, bro, you got to make that catch.
Yeah.
But
right.
But just not getting open, not playing with any emphasis, not playing with any urgency. Just if he wasn't getting the ball, it was such a disappointing season. Yeah. And he still caught 30 passes for over 300 yards. Right. I mean, that just shows his talent.
I think that actually surprises me. I hadn't looked up the stats. I think that actually surprises me.
Yeah, well, a lot of it, he had 16 after 4 games. He had 19 after 5 games. I mean, so he didn't do his. I mean, he should have had a lot more. But
yeah,
I was very disappointed by not just his play, but his effort for a good chunk of the year, and his focus and his attitude. And you hear some things behind the scenes, and you're just like, man, this kid's got to figure it out, because he's got too much talent not to be playing better than he did.
Yeah.
And I really thought he was going to play well in the bowl game, and he didn't really play well. He played hard, but he didn't play well in the bowl game. And that's why he wasn't the guy who was getting targeted, in my opinion.
That's how it goes, though.
Yeah. So that's biggest surprise. Let's get back onto some fun things. So these last few.
Okay.
And the next one is the comeback player of the year on offense. Now, comeback can mean one of two things, and I'll kind of set up yours a little bit. Comeback can mean sort of coming back throughout the year, but where I kind of viewed it is more so coming back based on how last year went, whether it's a really bad year or an injury, that kind of thing. So, Vince, who is your offensive comeback player of the year?
So I did take this a bit of a different direction than I think you intended me to go, but
correct.
But I don't care. No, for me, comeback year, of course, is about you played like crap last year. You're playing great this year. You had an injury last year. You're not injured this year, and you played well, however the case may be, right? That's usually what comeback player of the year is. For me,
and that's what it was for the person who created the list.
No, that's fine. For me, it was coming back from an injury, but it was all encapsulated into one season. Sure. And it's Tyler Buchner. I thought the fact that he played in this game at 100%, I think is amazing, number one. I think that the manner in which he played was really, really good. I mean, yes, I don't really want to dissect his game and what happened. I don't want to go down that road because I know what people in the chat are going to do. So I want to take a breath on that. But I just want to say the injury that he had after a game and a half of the season, to not have played in 3 months, to come back and play the game that he played, I think is impressive. I think it's really, really impressive. And so that one, it's Tyler Buchner for me as far as comeback on the offensive side of the ball. to put up 500 plus yards, 45 points, be responsible for 5 offensive touchdowns. That's impressive. And I'm going with Buckner here.
So Vince went with comeback player of the game. I'm going to go with comeback player of the year. Comeback player of the year is, to me, it's a no-brainer. It's Zeke Correll. And Zeke was a little banged up last year, but he was so bad last year when he played. He started the season at left guard. For those who maybe don't remember, Zeke started last year at left guard, did not play well, was brutal. By middle of the year, had gotten benched.
Terrible. He benched, and rightfully so.
Rightfully benched. I mean, he was not good. And so what does he do? He comes out this year, and he plays so well in the spring that Notre Dame decides to move Jarrett Patterson to guard. That's how well he played in the spring. Then he comes out in the fall, and the first couple games, it's
rough.
It's rough.
It's rough.
It's bad. And it looked like, same as last year. But by the 4th or 5th game, he was really good. And you could make a case that the debate for who the number 2, somebody asked, well, we're surprised that neither of us picked Blake Fisher. Here's why. You can make an argument that Zeke Correll is in the is more in the conversation for who was the second best lineman on the team this year than Blake Fisher would be for being the best lineman. Like, to me, like, Zeke Correll is in the conversation for best lineman behind Joe Alt this year. That includes Jarrett Patterson, and that includes Blake Fisher, because of the consistency after the first couple weeks was really good. The leadership he showed this season, to me, was also really just impressive to me. The steadiness with which he played, the competitiveness with which he played. He was the polar opposite of what he was last year. Blake would have been a good choice, and I'd have been fine with that because of Blake coming back from the injury and only playing 2 games. And I'm fine with people to do that pick. And I'd see some people went with Blake, and that's totally fine. But to me, Zeke's thing of how bad he was last year to how good he was this year is what gave the pick for me. And I think Blake would have been a good pick. I think Josh Lugg could have been a good pick for this one. Because and I'll have something on Josh Lugg here in a little bit. There's other guys that you could go with on this one, Vince, for sort of that comeback aspect of the award. But for me, it's just I have to go with Zeke Correll because of to see that kind of 180 as a player. You don't see that very often when guys are seniors. You see that like a guy who has a rough freshman or sophomore year gets better, but Zeke's just, and it started in the spring, and having him at center so helped solidify that line. It really did, because now you put a stud like Jarrett Patterson out at guard, and that's why your line became what it was. Notre Dame went for over 200 rushing yards this year 7 times, or at least they went for at least 220 rushing yards this year 7 times in 13 games. The last team to do that, 2017. Right? Well, there's a couple coincidences or a couple things that go in, those things have in common, right? Coaching. And we thought I think you might have even said this first. One of the people that would benefit the most from Harry coming back, I think this was a comment you made when Harry first got hired, Vince, was Zeke Correll. Mm-hmm. And that it ended up being so accurate because he showed faith in Zeke. Yeah. He didn't worry about last year's film. He went with, this is what you're doing for me. And Zeke rewarded him with just a heck of a year, a heck of a year for Notre Dame. And that's why he gets the award for me. But I think I think you could make a case. And some people, like I said, some people picked Blake Fisher. Some people I saw somebody have Josh Lugg. There's other guys you could have gone. Vince with Tyler Buckner. But I think Zeke Correll's the pick for me. He's the pick for me.
I like it.
So the last offensive award, we're not doing MVPs for offense and defense. We'll have one team MVP. And we're going to do most outstanding, and this is exactly what it is. It's basically your best player. It's your most outstanding player. Who is the guy that you look at and say, boy, this guy was just better than everybody else? Vince is going to go in a different direction here than I think most people will think. So unless you're ready to change your mind.
Well, the way you just described it again, it's like he's just better than everybody else. Like,
that's what most outstanding means.
I know, right? And I was trying to spread the award around.
I get you. You've already if you don't change your pick, then you're going to give the guy you picked more awards than you're going to give the guy that I picked.
Which is why I can't do it. I realized that as I was going back over my list, right?
Okay.
Because the way I like to do these lists, to be honest with you, is I go with gut. So like I read it, I'm like, yes, this kid. Like, yeah, this kid. I don't know how you can go with anybody else but Michael Mayer. He was by far the best offensive player on this team. He was the offense for a good majority of the season. He was the offense. And the fact that a tight end is your offense says how good he is. I mean, and this was a decent offense. I mean, they put up a decent amount of points. They won 9 games this year, 8 with him. I mean, the fact that a tight end is the focus of your offense with all the talent that Notre Dame does have, that just you can't pick anybody else. I'm sorry.
Agree. So just for the record, Vince originally had Audric Estime as his pick because there's another reason why we'll get to later of why he had that. But yeah, I think it's easily Michael Mayer. I mean, best tight end in the country, most prolific tight end in the history of Notre Dame football, which is saying a lot.
Yeah,
developed into an outstanding blocker, team leader. So he produced, he played hard, he was a leader, he was clutch. I mean, he did everything you expected a great player to be.
Yes.
And so it's Michael Mayer. That's easily a big one for me. We're gonna have one last offensive award, Vince, before we jump to the defense. And this is not a positive or negative per se. It's self-explanatory. The biggest regret that you have from the offensive side of the ball, it can be a play, it can be a player. We're going to kind of focus on a player that you have for the we actually have 2 more, the 2022 season.
So my biggest regret, and this is a pretty easy one for me, was the inconsistent use of Chris Tyree. And I know this is Sean Steyer's favorite topic on the planet, with rightfully so, because he would bang on this topic. Why are you not getting him involved? Why are you not getting him involved? And then they got him involved and it was amazing. And then they just stopped using him again. Like it was one of the most perplexing things of the season for me. And I felt like that it was a missed opportunity. Chris Tyree is a missed opportunity offensively for this team. And if he stays, great. If he goes, I get it, man. Like, I get it. I understand it because we've seen glimpses of it being so freaking good and being able to be used in such creative ways. And then they just forget that he's there and they just try to run him between the tackles. And it's like, okay. So that's my biggest regret. No doubt about it.
Can I pose a thesis on that? Because I think it's a part of me wonders, Vince, and I could be completely wrong on this, but part of me wonders if they were worried about him holding up over the course of the year. And that's why he didn't get a lot of touches at times. They needed to keep him fresh, but they wanted to have that in their bag. Because if you think about it, if people say, well, Tommy doesn't have faith in Chris Tyree, it's hard for me to go with that when you look at how he was used in some of the big games. I mean, he was a focal point of the Carolina game plan. He was a big part of what they did against Clemson.
Yeah.
Part of me wonders if he was like, dude, we need him against Clemson, so I don't want to get him hurt against UNLV.
And they used him on the perimeter against South Carolina.
Right. Like, they had some nice plays lined up for him early against BYU. Drew just missed him. Remember and then he had a drop on another one.
Yeah.
Part of me wonders if that was it, Vince, if it was maybe that. I don't have any proof of that. It's just a wondering because it's like, why would you use him in the big games and then not other games?
Right.
It was always something that puzzled me. So anyway, I think you could have gone with that. I think you could have gone with not playing Tobias Merriweather earlier and more often. I think that's one that I thought about. There was a couple others that you could get into sort of like game plan type things. I don't want to get into that right now. I'm going to use kind of player. Mine, though, is Avery Davis, that we didn't get to see Avery Davis this year.
Yeah, that's a good
because I think Avery Davis could have contended with Michael Mayer for best leader.
Yeah.
I think he would have been a clutch player. I think it would have, I think by the end of the year, we would have seen Jaden Thomas have the breakout, but I think Jaden kind of could have used that leadership a little bit early in the year. So I just see some things like that, Vincent, and I say, boy, I would have loved to have seen Avery Davis be this year. And I think Avery Davis would have been such a compliment to Michael Mayer for a kid like Drew Pine who didn't want to get the ball outside, who wanted to focus on the stuff over the middle, having a weapon like Avery Davis, and then you have Jaden Thomas, and then you have Michael Mayer. Then you have the running backs. I think would have really helped Drew out a lot.
That's a good point.
Avery was such a clutch player for Notre Dame. He was such a money guy. Third down, he was money. Game on the line, he was money. And he was a great leader. And I think his presence on the field could have been really good for Tyler early in the year as well. Could have really helped settled Tyler Buckner down against Ohio State and Marshall. And just not having him was a bummer for me.
I agree.
It was a big bummer for me.
He would have elevated that wide receiver room. I think
no
he would
doubt
have elevated Drew's play.
And you could have flat out benched Lorenzo Styles,
yeah.
which was about the only thing that maybe could have snapped Lorenzo back to life, because you didn't have the option to bench Lorenzo. There was literally no one to bench him for, especially November when Tobias was out.
Yeah.
So who are you going to put in?
Right.
You know, and so you'd have lost Eli Raritan to tight end. You'd lost Kevin Bauman at tight end. You'd lost Avery Davis at receiver. You lost Tobias at receiver. There was really nobody else to put in. Mm-hmm. And so I think, to me, that's why I go with Avery. He could have brought so much value. You could have gone with Jadarian Price as an option here, him being hurt. But it's kind of like, it's hard for me to say that when you look at how good the running back room was. You know, so I'm going with Avery Davis. I think Avery Davis could have been money this year.
I love that.
Here's the last one, and this is a bit of a fun one. What's the best storyline related to a player, either at a moment or over the course of the year, something that maybe made you feel happy? I kind of have two, Vince. I'm going to go with a game and then the course of the season. Ooh. And so I'm going to kind of cheat a little bit and go with
That's
two.
okay.
But what was your best storyline? And this is one so everybody knows. I sent this to Vince like 10 minutes ago because it kind of popped in my head of one I wanted to do and just kind of forgot to put on our list.
That's
so
cool.
If you want, I can start off, Vince.
Well,
you continue.
I don't know that this is the route. I don't know if this is the route you want me to go, but I'm going here because I'm having trouble coming up with anything else. So, I mean, the storyline offensively for me is the quarterback position and what happened and everything about what happened behind center. Whether it was the quarterback competition in the fall that wasn't very close and dealing with some of the other media members who didn't see it that way, which was perplexing to me. Sean Davis brought that up in our post-game show on Friday night. I was just like, yeah, man, what were they seeing that we weren't seeing? But anyway, so you had that whole part of it. Then you had, Tyler Buckner getting hurt. Then you had Drew Pine stepping in, what he was able to do, what he was not able to do, the highs, the lows, the peaks, the valleys, the nonsense that we were listening to and dealing with, and the noise and all of that. And then to top it off, you've got Drew Pine transferring after the final game of the season and Tyler Buckner stepping in to be the starting quarterback after being out for 3.5 months. Like, that whole storyline was just so many peaks and valleys and just drove this entire season offensively. I mean, that's the storyline for me, is the quarterback. And I don't know, like I said, I don't know if that's the direction that you were thinking about, but that's immediately the one that came into my head.
It was meant to be kind of broad.
Okay.
Right? Like, I mean, that's kind of that storyline, right? I wanted it to kind of be that way. For me, I'm going to go kind of more player-centric on this one.
Okay.
And I've got the moment, and the moment was the final game for Braden Lindsey. Because what you saw on Friday was just what he'd been doing all year. Running past people and getting open for potential big plays.
All year.
Like, all year.
All year.
And never got the ball. You still got fans thinking he stinks. You still got fans thinking he shouldn't play because he had a drop. And so he doesn't, like, when was the last time you saw, I mean, he had the drop this year. Like, he didn't have drop problems last year. He didn't have drop problems in 2019 when they used him correctly. So he just became a whipping boy for Notre Dame fans. And I don't know why fans tend to do this, but especially the ones that only watch on TV. Because if you still think you can evaluate receivers for anything other than what happens when the ball comes to them off a TV copy, you're just wrong. I said this to somebody the other day. Well, Pete Sampson. I was talking with Pete because Pete Sampson and I were sitting next to each other at the game on Friday. And when I could just tell by his reaction to Braden's touchdown that he kind of had the same reaction that I did, which is, see, told you. And I kind of looked at him. I was like, that dude should have had 1,000 yards this year. And he was like, yeah, he should have had 1,000 yards. I mean, it just, everybody that was at games consistently, Vince, saw that, So it was just kind of one of those things where, like, if you were at the games consistently, you saw it every game. Braden Lindsey had a play like that at least 2 or 3 times.
Yes.
Every single game.
Every single game.
Every game.
Yes.
And he never complained. He never pushed back. He just, hey, I'm doing my thing, right? But when the moment came he stepped up. And that play was big, but he had that clutch third down catch on the slant. What a great route that was.
Yes.
Like what we had been missing for years. He's like stutters and then just leans that guy out hard. And that's what created the separation for the slant. You had the reverse play, which was huge. You had the jet sweep early in the game where he had to bubble around the defensive end and then get vertical again to get those yards. I just love seeing it. But the storyline throughout the entire year for me is Josh Lugg. I was so happy for Josh Lugg this year because, he was another guy that for the offensive line last year was the whipping boy, even though you could argue he was their best lineman last year consistently. He was better than Jarrett Patterson most of last year. Who else would it have been? You know what I mean? If it's not for Josh Lugg. Pro Football Focus, I hate to even say this, had him as the highest graded offensive lineman last year, which doesn't say a lot because their grades suck. But, I thought that he was solid last year. He just had some bad moments that everybody just kind of globbed onto, right?
Of course they did.
But he did struggle to stay healthy his whole career, comes back for a 6th year, knows what he's getting from Harry Heastan, knows that he's not going to keep a starting job at right guard, knew he had to battle for a starting job at right guard. He had every reason in the world to say, nah, enough of this stuff. And he came back, and he was a really steady player for Notre Dame this year. I mean, you hardly ever heard his name get mentioned.
He gave himself a shot at playing in the future.
Yes.
He did.
Because he stayed healthy. He was able to stay healthy, and he showed that he can play guard. His pass blocking inside of guard was outstanding this year. His run blocking at times was inconsistent from a technique standpoint, but his pass blocking inside was outstanding. So I just was happy for him. I got to know Josh a little bit during the recruiting process, and you always got to try to, separate your critiques from the person, and that can be hard sometimes, right? But to know how bad he wanted this, and to see him kind of come out and just be the steady player that he was this year was good to see. It was really good to see.
Absolutely. I've always been a Josh Lugg fan, and I never doubted him as far as his ability and what he was able to do. Battling through injuries is always tough, especially as an offensive lineman. But he's another one of those guys that could have sat out the game. I mean, he had every reason to sit out the game, especially with his injury history. But he decided to play against South Carolina as well. And that, again, that says a lot about, who they are. I mean, I've always just been a big fan of Josh Lugg, the human. And it's nice to be able to be a big fan of Josh Lugg, the football player, as well.
Yeah.
So I hope nothing but the best for him.
I think he was part of what was a really big storyline, which is the pettiness of me to say, I told y'all that offensive line coaching was the problem. Like, it was so clear this year that was the problem.
I mean,
this is such a better coach football team.
Look at the guys that you've brought up already.
But technique doesn't matter, Vince.
Yeah,
technique doesn't matter.
Didn't matter for Zeke. It didn't matter for Josh. It doesn't matter any of that. So
right. But that was my storyline there. Let's talk defense, Vince. Let's hand out some hardware for the Notre Dame defense.
Some hardware,
right?
baby.
Let's have some fun with this.
All right.
The first two, I think, are going to be kind of easy. I think, Vince. I mean, they are for me anyway. I know you're going to go a different direction with some guys just because you're going to force some things, but let's do it. Let's do it.
Force some things.
Breakout player for Notre Dame this year. Who was the breakout player for Notre Dame?
So I don't know. You're probably not going to agree with me here, but I don't care. I needed to find a place for Xavier Watts.
Yeah, I did too, but not here.
Such a jerk. For me, this is where Xavier Watts fits the best because I feel like, you and I love Xavier Watts as far as what he's able to do on the football field. And we both had high aspirations for him to be an offensive player.
I still want him a receiver.
I know. I still want
him a receiver.
When they moved him to receiver, I was super excited, and all of these different things, and then they just kind of abandoned that experiment, and it's whatever. Anybody who says Xavier Watts is not a starting safety going into next year doesn't know how to watch defense. I'm sorry. Xavier Watts is a starter on this defense, and he's the only person on this team that I think is a starter at safety at the moment, at the very present. Like, he has his spot etched in stone. The other one, we'll see what happens, right? He is, and I don't think people realize that that's what he was going to be. He was kind of a forgotten man going into the season defensively, because if he was starting, They're not bringing him over to offense. They're not even trying that experiment because he was getting lost in the shuffle in the preseason at safety. They're like, well, let's try him out on offense. We need numbers over there at wide receiver now that Avery Davis is down and all these different things. And he's like, dude, I'll do whatever the team needs me to do, but I'm still a dude. And he showed that as the season wore on. He got more and more playing time at each game that came. He's a starter at safety. I'm sorry. He is the etched in stone starter at safety going into 23. So he's not my biggest surprise, and he's not your biggest surprise, that kind of a thing, but he's a breakout player. He went from lost in the shuffle to starter. That's breakout to me.
That's a fine way. You can look at it that way. I think that's fair. The way you explain it's fair. I do. I think it's fair. I have to go with Benjamin Morrison here. Technically, you could say he wasn't a breakout because he was a freshman and he didn't have a previous season and all that. But I mean, the kid played. He was a freshman All-American. I watched a lot of football this year. He was one of the 10 best cornerbacks I saw in college football.
Sure,
this year. Forget freshman wise, he was a stud. And South Carolina literally avoided him the entire game. They threw at him once,
pick,
and he got picked. You know what I mean? Like, and he had some big moments. And I'm not going to talk too much about him here because we're going to talk about. Well, actually, you know what? Let me talk about him here because then we can move on to the next one. I was going to say
because I've got him in multiple categories moving forward.
It was really game one. I mean, he steps up against Ohio State. He's making plays, breaks up that in cut. He's in great coverage. He had a couple play. He got beat a couple times this year, which is going to happen. But like the Syracuse game is a perfect example, Vince. Comes out and they're picking on him early. Gives up the touchdown pass, gets called for pass interference. And then what does he do in the second half? Just locks him down. Just completely locks him down. And, they try going at him. And remember, he was the guy in coverage on that interception that got negated because they called they called some kind of defensive penalty, offsides or something. And he bats that ball in the end zone that Brandon Joseph picked off. You remember that against Syracuse in the second half? That was Morrison in coverage. He was just an outstanding player for them. And we'll talk about him more again in a little bit, but let's quickly do the newcomer, and then we can get your thoughts on Benjamin Morrison because he's my pick for Newcomer of the Year award, and I know he's yours.
Of course.
So, just give you a chance to talk about Benjamin Morrison.
I mean, how could Benjamin Morrison not be the Newcomer of the Year? I mean, yes, that involves transfers, and yes, that involves true freshmen. And going into fall camp, I know he was still high on your list, but everybody was talking about Jaden Mickey.
He wouldn't have been my pick. Right. It'd have been Mickey or Brandon Joseph.
Right.
Just because Benjamin was not the early enrollee and Jaden was really good in the spring and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, he would not have been my pick. Now, he's my pick to be – I had him top 100 player, 5-star upside. I've said he's a first-round talent and all this, but I didn't expect him to be this good right away. I did not.
Right.
I'd be lying if I said I did, Vince.
And that's the thing. I mean, he outkicked the coverage on everybody. I mean, he was just so good. And, I mean, there's no way that you couldn't pick him. Like, I was going, I was scouring YouTube for like top plays of the year and different things like that. And they were all Benjamin Morrison. Like It was, I mean, and the picks that he had were in such big moments too. Like it wasn't just, he didn't load up on, like the New Mexicos of the world and
or Hail Marys at the end of the first half of a game, of the UNLV game or something like that.
Exactly. Like he got him in the biggest moments. Clemson. I mean, it was just they were opportunities.
BC the same way. Your offense doesn't get points that first drive. BC gets the ball. You pick the pass off. You give them room. BC hits a big play. Yeah. They go deep. They beat Tariq Bracy on a deep ball, right? And then they go right at him in the end zone. I mean, that game was 14-0. They score right there. All of a sudden, it's 14-7, and we're in a ball game again. And he picks it off. I mean, so. Yeah, and then the one in the second quarter against South Carolina. If they don't throw a pick there, they're still got maybe a shot to go down and score. So yeah, you're right. The plays he made this year, Vince, were meaningful. They weren't garbage. They weren't racking up crappy opponent or end of half. Like people that get like a guy had 10 sacks, but like 4 of them were like on 3rd and 19, and 2 more were at the end of the game, and like guy really wasn't a great pass rusher. Yeah. That's not the case for Benjamin Morrison this year.
Yep, I completely agree. So. It's Ben Morrison. I mean, he's just so good. And how nice is it just to have a lockdown corner? Notre Dame's have good corners. Don't get me wrong. Julian Love, all the guys that we've taught, they're all good corners. They're playing in the NFL. They're really good corners. but just to have a lockdown dude.
Right.
Notre Dame hasn't had that in a really long time.
Right.
And that is so to know that he's going to be here for at least another 2 years.
Yeah.
Makes me feel even better about the situation. Yeah. So it's got to be Ben Morrison.
Let's go with best big man, Vince. This is a defensive lineman or linebacker. You could have just said defensive lineman because there's no way we're picking a linebacker.
So
but let's go
best. If I would have picked a linebacker, you'd have been mad at me. Is that what
your connection might have gone out, and you might not have been able to finish the show. That's fair. Unfortunately, yeah,
that would be fair. That would be a lot.
Best big man.
Fair. Well, this one was. I will say that overall, I expected more out of the defensive line this year than what we got.
A lot more.
And that's disappointing to me because I thought that the defensive line was going to be a real strength of this team. Now, they were still a really good part of this team, but I don't know if
at times they were really good.
Right. I don't know that they were head and shoulders the best group on the field. You know what I mean? For the year. So this was a little bit difficult, if I'm being honest with you. And I think I might have given this award based more on a career than a season. And I gave it to Isaiah Foskey, who obviously is the all-time sack leader at Notre Dame. So for me, it was hard to go away from him. And nobody else stood out to me from an individual standpoint to take over that mantle.
Yeah. I don't think you should look at this as a career award, Vince. I think it was still look. Was he as good this year as he was last year? No. But the guy still finished with 14 tackles for loss and 11 sacks and had some clutch moments. He wasn't as clutch as he was last year, but he had some clutch moments. There was no question he was their best defensive lineman. I just think it was one of those, maybe he wasn't as good as we hoped he would be.
Yeah.
But that was across the board. Jason Adamiola wasn't as good as I'd hoped he would be. Justin Adamiola wasn't as good as I hoped he would be. I think Riley Mills is one of the more underrated players in the D-line. He's the new whipping boy that, he'll never get credit for when he makes plays, but he always gets ripped on if he doesn't, even when he doesn't actually do anything wrong. I thought Howard Cross, after the first 3-4 games, had a chance to win this award. He was their best defensive lineman for a few games, but then he did what we kind of expected Howard Cross to do as a starter, which is wear down.
Sure.
But it was really a disappointing season from the defensive line.
It was
overall. It was, and Isaiah Foskey was clearly their best player. There's no question. The next one, there's going to be some debate on, Vince, because I'm going to kind of pull a Vince on this one.
Yeah.
The next is the best skill player. Okay. This could be a rover or a defensive back. So we went with there, Vince. Who is your pick for the best skill player?
Unfortunately, the defense for me is kind of a Ben Morrison award show, and I had to go with Ben Morrison. He's the top skill player. He was the guy that I thought when a play needed to be made in a big moment, it felt like he was making that big play. And yes, he's a true freshman, but he's my top skill player.
I'm going a different direction. I'm going Cam Hart. Now, Cam Hart's going to get a lot of criticism because of how bad he was in the opener and because he had that boneheaded play against North Carolina. But if you go back and watch Cam Hart at the end of the year, number one, I'm making this choice because I don't want this to be the Benjamin Morrison Award show. Okay?
That's fair.
Number two, I think that this is a way for me to give some credit to Cam Hart because I don't think people realize after the North Carolina game, Cam Hart was really good. And the reason that people don't realize that is for the same reason that people think that Braden Lindsey stunk, because you never saw him. But the reason you never saw him is because nobody would throw at him.
Agreed.
Teams avoided him all year after the North Carolina game. Nobody was willing to throw at Cam. And his coverage was outstanding. He was locking dudes down. He's part of the reason that Clemson, that Benjamin Morrison had the production he had, was because teams kept throwing at him. And just to put some context into how good how good Cam Hart was this year, okay? Because again, he's another one of those guys that for whatever reason has become like the new whipping boy by some Notre Dame fans, which is really odd. Some of the choices that y'all make for your new whipping boys, and I don't know if it's as much as our chat as it is the people on Twitter who are just kind of insane. But Cam Hart this year, Vince, in 12 games, gave up 22 completions on 44 attempts for 240 yards. Julian Love, in his All-American season, gave up almost as many completions as Cam Hart had attempts against him the entire year. Teams threw at Cam Hart 44 times this year. Julian Love gave up 42 completions in 2018, the year he was a consensus All-American. Okay, so you look at that number, and then you look at the fact that Julian gave up 413 yards that year. And you say, okay, that's impressive. And Cam gave up 240 yards this year. Gave up 54 and let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. About 20% of those came in the Ohio State game where he did not play well against Ohio State. Did not. I think the hamstring was in his head. He was grabby. He wasn't doing what he normally can do, and he didn't play well. After that, he had 2 bad plays, and he was really good the rest of the year. But Cam Hart this year was really good for Notre Dame. Again, he gave up 22 completions this whole season. Julian Love never in his entire career gave up that fewer completions. And the lowest he had was as a freshman, he gave up 25. And that's because he played a lot fewer snaps than Cam did this past season. So Cam Hart this year was absolutely brilliant this season and played in 336 coverage snaps this year, gave up 22 receptions. And opponents only completed 50% of their throws against him. For more context, Julian Love, the year he was an All-American, gave up 53.2% completion rate. Now, the year before, he was much better in completion, 43.6. But again, he got thrown at 83 times. 83 times. And Cam Hart got thrown at 44 times this year. And this is a guy that got thrown at 66 times last year, right? So the message was out, don't throw at number 5. So then what did people choose to do? Let's throw at 20. And they learned to regret it. And it's not a coincidence that if you look at Benjamin Morrison in the last 2 games, it kind of changed a little bit, right? Against USC and South Carolina. He didn't get targeted all that much. And you ask yourself, why? Well, there's no Cam Hart. And so teams were like, well, we don't have to throw at 20 now. So they started picking on other people. And if you look at Benjamin Morrison, Vince, which is crazy, the last 2 games of the year, he was only thrown at 4 times. Most of the year, I mean, coming into that game, he got thrown at 6 times against Boston College. He got thrown at 0 times against Navy. It's a different deal. 13 times against Clemson, 5 times against Syracuse, 6 times against UNLV, 5 times against Stanford. These are individual games, Vince. He got thrown at 4 times combined the last 4 games, and he gave up 9 receiving yards in the last 4 games, Benjamin Morrison. Why? Because you didn't have number 5 on the other sideline to avoid, so you could go at somebody else.
Right.
And so I think that speaks volumes. So yes, Benjamin Morrison was absolutely brilliant this year, but Cam Hart was pretty flipping good too. And so I'm going best skill player just to shout out how good Cam Hart was. I don't think people realize that. You know what I like too? I was talking to a source that's very close to Cam, and the source was explaining to me why Cam was choosing to come back, and the biggest reason why was Benjamin's breakout. And I was like, okay, explain that to me, because you're thinking like, he's like, no, because he knows that next year teams can't avoid him the way that they did this year with Benjamin on the other side. Like once Benjamin broke out, it's like, you're going to have to throw at me now. And remember that one time Syracuse tried to throw at him? He almost caught a pick 6. You know what I mean? This is going to forget that. We're going to go with somebody else. We're going to go back to Morrison. They kept picking on Benjamin again. And that didn't work out well. But he wants to be part of a great cornerback tandem, but he didn't want to be part of a situation where he just never gets thrown at the whole year.
Yeah, right.
And so that's played a role into him coming back, which I think the injury to the shoulder was the final straw that, I need to come back now. But I was told he was leaning towards coming back even before that because of Benjamin Morrison's breakout.
Love that.
So, knowing that you can't avoid me now, and if you do avoid me, we're going to make you pay for it because my boy over there is going to lock you down.
Well, just think about the fact that they're going to have 2 lockdown corners.
Yeah.
Going into next year.
Yeah.
2. Yeah. Good luck, everybody.
Yep.
Good luck. Can't wait. You know what? It's going to be that's going to be, you want to talk about matchups to watch? How about the matchups to watch about Ohio State's wide receivers versus Notre Dame's corners next year? That's going to be fun.
Yes.
That's going to be
and I think
fun.
It's going to make them both better.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. And I'm not saying Notre Dame's going to win that matchup. But I am saying that that's going to be one heck of a matchup, and that's going to be so much fun to watch. And I get to actually watch. We'll watch it in person at Notre Dame Stadium. It's going to be awesome.
Yeah.
Hopefully,
they're going to be tested again next year. You got USC's receivers, you got Ohio State's receivers. You're going to have. It's going to be awesome.
Yeah,
it's going to be a lot of fun.
So yeah, I think that's a great pick, though. I mean, everybody knows my affinity for Cam Hart, so I love watching him play. I love the way he played this year, and I thought he was, it was like beating my head against a wall to bring up how well Cam Hart was playing like throughout the year, because everybody was, what are you talking about? That kind of a thing. It was just like, thank you for doing that, because that.
And in the chat, Gene Allen said, that another name he brought up was Tariq Bracy.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think people realize how good Notre Dame's corners were when Tariq, Cam, and Benjamin were all healthy.
Absolutely.
Like, you could not throw on this team. There's a reason they rank so high in throwing the football, despite who they played this season.
Right.
Because once Benjamin emerged as the dude, you started to see, like, okay, this team is going to be really hard to throw the football on. Yeah. Really hard to throw the football on. So I enjoyed that. I enjoyed watching them both. And we'll talk more about Tariq here in a little bit. But best skill player. Here's one that's a little tougher for me, Vince. Best leader of the defense. This was a little tougher, not because there were so many good options like there was on offense. I think the opposite for me is kind of, we have the same pick, but this one discouraged me a little bit. I'm going to be honest with you.
It was harder, but I think at the end of the day, through all the crap, that JD Bertrand was the best leader on defense. And I think there were some picks, some opportunities. I think both Adam Alola's, were kind of in the mix as far as somebody to pick when it was all said and done. I don't know. I think Cam Hart's a hell of a leader too. If we just got done talking about Cam Hart, I think he's a heck of a leader. I think playing the position that JD plays, I think the manner in which he plays kind of put him above everybody else. It's almost easier to be a leader when you're in the middle of the defense like that. But I think he's a really good leader. And I think that's one of the reasons that he was on the field as much as he was because of his leadership. So for me, it was JD.
That was mine too. And look, JD didn't always play as well as you wanted him to. I think JD played a lot better than a lot of people give him credit for. He was not good, as good as he needs to be, but he was their best linebacker by far this season of the starters. But there's no doubting his leadership in play, in off the field. I think Justin Adamiola would be of the brothers would be the one that I would probably go with as maybe my next guy.
Yeah.
But honestly, with Isaiah Foskey, I don't mean to rip the kid, but he didn't show me great leadership this year with what we saw on the field, with what I heard behind the scenes. Like, I was just a little disappointed there. Brandon Joseph was a captain in Northwestern. I saw very little leadership there on the field and off of it. It really came down to JD Bertrand was that dude for Notre Dame, and it really wasn't close. But the fact that it wasn't that close, it's not because JD's Manti. That's what made it a little disappointing for me.
Yeah.
And why I was hoping that there'd be more guys to kind of step up and battle for that. And there really weren't. And that was a slow bummer.
I do like, I'll throw this up here just because I think it is somewhat accurate. Bo Bauer, if he hadn't gotten hurt, I think he would have been on the short list for leadership on the defensive side as
possibly.
Well. I think that's
he was definitely that guy on special teams, Vince. Like if we were doing a special teams leadership award, it definitely would have been Bo for that one. He was a captain and look, he was out there at midfield in the bowl game. What does it say about you had Avery and Bo out there at midfield? Now, part of it's because Foskey and Mayer were captains that weren't in the game, but I think it says a lot about both of those guys that they were out there, even though they were hurt.
Yeah.
So I was impressed. I was impressed with his leadership, and I was impressed with the fact that JD struggled early and didn't allow it to snowball and become a bigger problem. And he didn't allow the targeting issues where he got kicked out of 2 games of targeting to kind of force him to press. Those were kind of boneheaded things. At least one of them was. But I went with JD on this one, and it really wasn't that close, Vince.
Agreed.
Let's go here. Let's go with your comeback player of the year.
This one's really hard for me. And I know who I picked, and I don't know that I want to stick with that pick. But the problem is I can't come up with anybody else.
Okay, let me give mine because I don't want you to get yourself like where you say something and people like come at you. Okay?
I know. That's what I'm saying.
I know who your pick is. Let me go with this one.
Okay.
I'm going Clarence Lewis.
Okay,
and here's why I'm going Clarence, because Clarence was solid this year. He was not great. He was solid, but he was really bad last year at times. Like really struggled at times last year. Every big game, like teams would just go right at Clarence. And part of it was because they put him in position he shouldn't have been in. They were asking him to be Notre Dame's 2021 coaches had to ask because of who else they had.
Sure.
They needed Clarence Lewis to be Benjamin Morrison, and he's not. And there's a reason he got beat out. But here's the thing for me. He was steady. He got beat a couple times. He had to give up the touchdown against North Carolina, gave up the touchdown against South Carolina. But he was really steady this year. He took getting benched. I mean, he did. He flat out got benched. There's no other way to spin that, right? Then he got benched. He got beat out by a freshman. There's no other way to spin that. But he didn't get down. He didn't pout. He said, hey, whatever my role is going to be. He was a very solid player on the outside, had a huge interception against Navy, which kind of helped somewhat Notre Dame get the distance they needed to hold off the second half comeback. Had some really nice tackles this year. And when guys got hurt, stepped up. I mean, look, by the fourth, here's the deal. In the fourth quarter against South Carolina, Notre Dame didn't have Cam Hart or Benjamin Morrison on the field. Neither one of them were there. They were both hurt. And Clarence had to step up and be that dude in the boundary. And guess what? He gave up the touchdown pass, right? But they tried to go back at him again, and he locked it down. He did a really nice job filling in the slot when they needed him to fill in the slot. So to me, he was my comeback player because of just how bad he was last year. And just, talk about a guy, you talk about in season to go from benched to a really key ingredient to, hey, whatever my role is, coach, let me know. I'll do it. You don't see a lot of guys, especially at that position. Mm-hmm. That's a position where you tend to get the biggest egos, if we're going to be real about it, right? And Clarence Lewis was one of those kids that showed no ego this year. It's, hey, I got beat out by a kid that's pretty good. What do you need me to do, coach? What's my role? Let whatever I need to do to help, I'm gonna be there to help. And that's what we saw from Clarence this year. And I'm gonna give him a lot of props for that. Is he a great player? No. I'm gonna have a lot to say about Clarence this offseason because I think Clarence could be a key to next year's secondary, but it's not a corner.
I agree.
And we'll talk about that. But I got a lot of respect for the kid because he took what happened to him in stride. He never lost confidence from how bad he was last year, and he kept battling. And that says a lot to me, Vince. So did I give you enough cover to say you're going to roll with me? Or are you?
I'm not rolling with you. I'm going somebody completely different.
Okay, but you're not going with your original.
I'm not going with my original.
Okay, thank God.
Yeah, I couldn't. I just because that was the first one that came to mind, but I can't go with that. And for obvious reasons, and I'm not even going to get into it because people are still going to yell at me. So,
good call.
There's
some things you can't. I know. Can't undo certain things, Vince.
I know. I agree with you. I'm actually going to go with Tariq Bracy, and I say comeback, and it's a fine line for comeback, and I get that. But he was a part-time starter last year, and he moves himself into a full-time starter this year, and really a guy that they absolutely missed when he got injured. Because you mentioned it earlier when it was Cam, Tariq, and Morrison, those three out there, it was a no-fly zone. Like that was the best group. And I had to look up Tariq to see if he had another year of eligibility, which he doesn't. He's played 5 years.
This was his COVID year.
Correct.
Yeah. He never had a red shirt. He literally played 5
played all 4 years, and then he played this year as well. And I was like, dang it. It would have been great for him to be able to come back.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I just feel like going from where, he was just kind of a steady Eddie type of player all the way through his career. And then this year he just became that dude at nickel. I mean, and they had him playing outside at times, but, due to injury and some things like that. And I thought he did a good job. And so I'm going with Tariq Bracy here because I don't have him in any other category. And I felt like he needed some love in these awards because he was an integral part of what going into the season, the secondary was a question mark. Going out of the season, the secondary is arguably the best group that was on the field. Mm-hmm. And now a lot of that has to do with Tariq Bracy.
Yeah. He solidified that nickel spot in a big way. He really did.
Yeah.
He really did. And in his comeback, you could almost make it where it's a career comeback award. When you talk about a kid that just completely, absolutely, utterly lost his confidence to be a football player in 2020.
Remember that?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And to come back and play the way he did this year was really –
and
it was fun to watch.
They started in the nickel almost every game. They started in the nickel, and you don't do that unless you have supreme confidence, in your secondary. So, yeah, that's good stuff.
Yep. Surprise player, Vince. What was your not surprise player? What was your biggest surprise on defense in 2022? I'm going to go with the positive one because my negative one I'm going to talk about in the storyline. So what is your biggest surprise on defense in 2022?
I am going with a positive one as well. My positive one was Justin Adamalola. Career backup, still a backup, going into this year, but they were able to kind of move him around because they knew that having him on the field was going to be a good thing. And I just thought that he played well the vast majority of the season. He had the second amount or did he lead the team in sacks last year? He had the second amount, right? He had the second most sacks. Justin.
Yeah, second. Isaiah Foskey clearly led the team in sacks
that's
last
right.
year.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Justin had the second most sacks last year. I don't know what it was this year, but I just felt like every time a play was made, he was around the football. And I just love watching that kid play. He was fourth
this year, tied with his brother behind Jordan Patello and Riley Mills.
I am on my hands and knees praying that he comes back. And I realize that's probably a pipe dream, but I really hope that Justin uses that final year of eligibility to come back because given him the opportunity to be the man, I think he can really do some things for this team. And that would be such a hole to fill if he's able to come back. So I really like Justin. I thought he was a big surprise for me. I shouldn't say a big surprise. I thought he was a surprise. I've always liked him. I thought he stepped up this year and last year, frankly, but I really like Justin.
My surprise is Xavier Watts, and not because he's a good player. We thought he'd be a good player. But had I told you before the year, by the end of the season, Xavier Watts will not only be a starter for Notre Dame, but will be their best safety, you'd have been like, nah. No, I don't think so. He was so productive the last two games. He's got some things to learn technically. Still's got to learn to take better pass to the football, some different things. But
sure,
man, he's just around the ball so much, and really became that breakup he had before the fake punt. That was huge. That kind of forced him, or the fake field goal that went for a touchdown. Like that was huge, man. Like that, or was it a fake punt? I forget. Did they line up the? I think they lined up to punt because it was their punter that threw that ball. But I thought he was also the holder, so whatever. But the fake special teams play that got the touchdown
against South Carolina, it was a fake field goal, and it was
because they lined up. They lined up in such a weird alignment. I was like, are they lining up the punt? Is the kicker on the field? Because they snapped the ball so quickly too.
We all we saw was the ball in the air.
Yeah,
so we didn't even get to see how it was lined up.
Like they lined up like there was no snap. Like they snapped it. The punter was behind the center and he caught the ball. Like they had moved it to that. So it looked almost like they were trying to fake a punt. It was weird. And Notre Dame was unprepared for it. But he was their best. That breakup he had to play before, just to get that inside out, that inside leverage on that guy, not to use his hands to interfere, to play the football. He's a really good player. You start talking about, we talked about the cornerback play for next year and how exciting it is to think about how good that could be.
Yeah.
You throw Xavier Watts into that conversation.
Yes,
you start thinking, boy, this secondary is going to look pretty athletic next year. And you start getting excited about it. Wasn't surprised that he played. I expected him to play. It was just, will they settle in on a position for him? But the surprise is just how well he played late in the year and how comfortable he looked at safety. He made impact plays against Boston College. Remember the sack? I think it was a sack or a tackle for loss, with the snow coming in. My wife's got a great photo of that too, by the way, Vince. I'll have to show it to you.
Nice.
But, he was really good this year. Once he finally got settled, because when we forget, he was splitting time a receiver in fall camp, and early in the season because they were so limited there, and just did a really, really nice
And they
job.
never changed his number back to 4, which I thought was disappointing. That was exciting to be a little single digit action, and they stuck with 26.
Yeah, it's all good. It's a good safety number. So that's my biggest surprise, Vince. Let's go for biggest. We'll do most outstanding last. Let's do biggest regret.
Okay.
On defense this season. What is your biggest regret on defense?
Realizing the stats might not back me up on this one. And I get that, being second on the team in sacks. Third. Okay. It's still, for me, it's Riley Mills. I was expecting, especially when you do a bunch of shows with Ryan, you're expecting Riley Mills to be a lot better than he ended up being. And he wasn't the impact player that I thought he was. Sure. He was steady.
I don't think they used him that way, though. I think Riley was really good this year.
They didn't allow him to rush all the time. I didn't like that, and
they didn't allow him to rush.
I blame part of that on Al Washington, to be honest with you.
Well, and Al Golden as well.
And Al Golden, that's fine. It's a regret. I think I regret the way that he was used, and I regret the production that came from it. That's a huge regret. So it's similar for me for the offensive one, where I went with Chris Tyree and the way they used him. I don't think they used him right, and it's a regret for me. So Riley Mills is a better player than he was able to show. How about that?
Yeah, I think he was a better player than his production. I think if you go back, because you talked about this, right? Whenever there was a key play, look at how many big plays Riley Mills had this year. I mean, you could point to several games where Riley had big moment plays. I think it was more about how they used him. They did not use the big end to attack this year. They used it as they were basically like they were playing like a two-gapping 3-4 at times this year, the way that they used their defensive lineman, Vince. And that was an Al Golden, Al Washington problem to me. They did not use him the way that they used Adi Ogundiji, or the past staff used Adi Ogundiji or Khalid Kareem. And it was frustrating because when they did turn Riley Mills loose, he got after the quarterback. Yeah. And we saw that with the big play he had against South Carolina at the end. It wasn't counted as a sack, but it was a pretty big play. So I thought Riley Mills was more productive than he was given credit for this year, in my opinion. And, was huge against North Carolina, had 2 sacks against North Carolina, had some big plays in that game. I didn't think they turned him loose. And I think the thing to the point you made too is they kept putting him inside and outside, and the kid hasn't mastered one position yet. Now you're trying to ask him to play like 3. So they'd put him at nose sometimes.
Yeah.
And it's like, it didn't make a lot of sense to me. But that is what it is. Mine for this year, Vince, my biggest regret this year on defense is that we never saw Brandon Joseph play the way that you thought he could play.
How we saw him play in the spring and in the fall. Yeah, holy crap.
And just really uninspired, didn't look focused a lot. Every little thing, you just kind of be out for a long time. And just, I don't want to say much more than that, but it just did he really want to be here?
Right.
That's kind of my big thing. And the fact that he declared for the NFL draft is evidence of that. Now, I think we could have an interesting conversation on the message boards about that, but he's not ready for the NFL. But that's just kind of where his mind was all year. And now he did step up in a big moment, and we'll talk about him in a little bit. But I just was very disappointed. You can even say maybe this is the biggest disappointment category, but its biggest regret is that we didn't get to see Riley Mills, Brandon Joseph be the guy that you thought he could be. That's mine.
That's fair. I thought that was more evident to me second half of the season than it was the first half of the season.
Yeah.
So I'll just leave it at that.
What is your top storyline, best storyline of the season for the defense?
This one is hard for me, and storyline, I'm going to go with just I went with the up and down nature of the quarterback position on offense, and I'm going to go with the linebacking core, right? The room. I'm going to go with the room, and just the starters never really took that step to be like, hey, we're the starters. Stop talking about these young guys. We're here. This is our time. They never really did that. And I'm not saying they played poorly all the time. I'm not saying that at all. But they didn't play to the standard that they needed to get people to stop talking about the young guys, right? And there was also times where it didn't feel like they were coached up very well. So the linebackers were a storyline for me. And we were constantly hearing about the youth. We saw some of the youth in the South Carolina game, the ups and the downs of that youth.
Oh, gotcha.
Of the younger
guys.
I
thought you were getting ready to try to say that they were young in the position, and I get what you're saying. I thought you were about to pull a Brian Kelly.
No.
Okay. You're talking about the guys that were actually young, not the starters.
Correct. We got to see a little bit of them in the bowl game, both positive and negative.
They should, to your point, Jalen Snead should have been able to work out those kinks against Cal and Marshall and
absolutely
to where he doesn't make that mistake in a bowl game.
Right. Because like I said, the starters never took that step to where they needed to play as much as they did. I'm not saying they should have
never
been replaced.
earned, to me, Jack Kaiser to a degree, but especially Maris Liufau, never earned the right to be the we're counting on you guy for 13 games that he was for Notre Dame.
Correct. They needed to be working in some other guys. They needed to give those guys an opportunity to take that starting spot, not just give it to them because of the potential, but they never even gave them an opportunity to put film on put film together to show that they needed to be starters. You know what I mean? So just the whole linebacking thing was an issue all year for me. And it was a storyline, and going into the season, I was very, very confident in what the linebacking room was going to be, not only because of the new talent that came in, the talent that was already there, but Al Golden literally coached linebackers in the Super Bowl. The head coach is the former linebacker coach. Like James Laurinaitis was a linebacker coach for the most part this season.
Yeah, but I'm going to give him this is the first year he's ever coached football.
And that's fine. I'm just all of those different pieces and parts that pointed to the linebacking position being one of a strength. And I'm not dissing. He
should have at least been good.
I'm just saying he was there as a
Vince. That was mine too. Just to play the linebackers was the big storyline for me, and just how it was puzzling. Like to see Maris Liufau regress, to see JD Bertrand regress. I thought Jack Kaiser finished the year off on a pretty strong note in 3 of the last 4 games. I think it's pretty good against Navy, pretty good against BC, pretty good against South Carolina. But they kind of limited how they used him late in the year too. They weren't using him in coverage as much, which is smart. They were using him to attack, and he's pretty good actually that way when he's able to run, stunt, and blitz off the edge. He had a big tackle for loss on the backside of a run in the game, and they limited his snaps and used him specifically, and that's kind of where he should be because he doesn't have the range, length, and stuff to do some of those things. But like Maris Liufau still playing as much as he did, even in the bowl game, I just was like, I'm sorry, I can't be with you there. And look, we talked a lot about Maris before the season because I mean, you'd see him in practice, you're like, man, this guy's athletic. This guy brings a lot to the table. He's rangy, he's explosive. You hear from all the sources about how good he is and all this, and then it gets to games, and you're just like, I don't know what he's doing.
Yeah,
like I have no clue what he's doing. And it was just very weird to me, to see him. Now he didn't, he played 44 snaps. We did see some of the other linebackers. I mean, Jack only had 31 snaps. We saw 17 from Jalen Snead, 13 from Prince Colley, 24 from Junior Tuihalamaka as a Viper. I'm sorry, Maris Liufau getting 44 snaps and Prince Colley only getting 13. First of all, I don't think that's a Pro Football Focus number. I don't think that's accurate. I could swear I saw Prince Colley out there more than 13 snaps.
Me too.
But that's still, even if it's 20, 25, that's still too much of a gap. I'm sorry. And I know he missed some time and bowl prep and all that, but my optimism for them really opening up the linebacker battles next year was diminished by how that played out. And then Maris did in the bowl game exactly what he's done all year. Even when he's there to make a play, he has a face mask. Instead of it being a tackle for loss, he has a face mask. He did that against Navy.
Right. Yes.
And it's just like, where's your instincts for football, man? Like, it's frustrating because, but he wasn't alone. Just how that whole position was used all year was very puzzling. And it was just an example of what happens when you think it's all about the scheme and not about teaching kids how to play.
Right.
And that was the frustrating thing for me. Let's wrap this part of it up, Vince, with the most outstanding player for the Notre Dame defense this season. Let's roll, Vince, because we are going to have I see you changed your pick on that one.
What do you mean? What are you talking about? It's right there. I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah. I see you've changed your pick, and we're now on the same page. Who is the most outstanding defensive player for Notre Dame in 2022?
Again, it is not my intention to give this award to the same guy over and over again. But at the same time, we also have to be realistic. And if we're talking about, and I changed my most outstanding for both offense and defense
during the show.
Yes.
As I was originally on Estime and Foskey.
You did.
The Foskey pick would have been fine. I would have been fine with that.
Yeah, but I'm sorry when you're talking about the guy who's above head and shoulders and all these different, descriptors that you were using, it's Ben Morrison. I mean,
Right.
he was the most outstanding. He had the biggest plays in the biggest moment. He was the best player on the defense. He just was. As a 18-year-old kid, he was the best one.
Yeah.
He's the most outstanding, period.
It's hard to argue with that. I mean, you could make a case for Foskey. Production-wise, Foskey was their most productive player. 14 tackles for loss, 11 sacks.
Yeah.
But, Benjamin also did, productive-wise was really good. I mean, he was in the national conversation for most interceptions. Finished tied for third right now at 6 this season and finished 23rd in return yards. He had the pick 6. So he was very, very productive. It's just, for me, it comes down to here's why Benjamin gets it over Isaiah for me, because Isaiah tied for 5th in sacks, right? And if you go sacks per game, he was 5th as well. So it's not just because he didn't play the last game, but it was, to me, it was consistency of production. Isaiah, like Benjamin, never had the kind of game like Isaiah had against Stanford, which was just awful.
Yeah,
you needed him to be big, and he wasn't. It was the consistency, but then also he made even more big plays than he did for this defense this year, Vince, what Isaiah did for the defense last year. Like in 2021, when a play needed to be made, Isaiah made it. I mean, he was going to step up and make that. He was so clutch last year.
Yes, he was.
That's what Benjamin was this beyond the production and just the overall play. He was clutch this year for Notre Dame. Well,
Foskey
almost
won the Oregon State game, the Oklahoma State game. At that play at the end, the strips. I mean, all the different. I mean, you're right. When a big play needed to be made, he made it.
We had him against USC. He had him. I mean, he just all year. It just when they needed a play, he made it.
Yeah,
blocking punts. In the last couple years, 3 years really, because he had a block in 2020 as well. But I'm going Benjamin Morrison is the most outstanding. I mean, it's really a 2-horse race. It's one of those two guys. It's Morrison or Foskey, and I think people could make a case for Foskey. Because he also he had a big sack against Cal late in the game. I mean, he didn't completely disappear from the big game moments, but he just wasn't as consistent as he needed to be. And I think part of this too, Vince, is if we're being honest, I think part of this is expectation factors in a little bit. I mean, we'd be lying. I think, at least I'd be lying. I don't want to speak for you, but I'd be lying a little bit if I didn't say part of my feeling about Foskey is that I expected him to be better, not necessarily more productive.
Yeah,
but just better,
more impactful for me. Like I expected him to be more impactful in games. So
that's it for me too. So that is the offense and defense, Vince. But we do have an award we want to hand out for special teams, and I want to kind of get into who was the best specialist for Notre Dame this year. Who was the most impactful specialist for Notre Dame this year?
This one honestly was easy for me. Now there is a case to be made. I will say there is a case to be made for Brandon Joseph. As much as I was knocking him, but he was number 12 in the country in punt returns, which Notre Dame couldn't even sniff a punt return situation.
Partly because teams just don't return punts anymore that much, right?
I get it. I'm just saying he was in the conversation. It was a very short conversation.
Yes, because you got to be there the whole year.
Yeah, right? It's John Sott. I mean, the way he was able to flip the field on numerous occasions, I just thought that him coming in, and again, you're a punter. You don't have to have chemistry and all of that with your teammates and things like that. But he was able to come in and he just solidified that spot because, look, Notre Dame lost a really good punter to the transfer portal, and they replaced him with an even better punter, in my opinion. And
a more consistent punter,
more consistent for sure. And so I think John Sott did a great job, better than I anticipated that he would do, if I'm being honest. I mean, he had a big leg when he needed it. He pinned teams when he needed to. I'm sure a lot of that had to do with Brian Mason, but if you can punt, you can punt. If you can't, you can't. And this kid can punt. So I go with John Sott.
It's a good one. It's an interesting one. I think there's a couple different directions I could go with this. John Sott would have been an easy one. I'm going to go a little outside the box a little bit. I'm going to go Prince Colley. And I look at him and I see a kid who was good in coverage, really good at getting down the field in coverage. He had a huge block in the season. And he also had obviously the scoop and the score on the punt return was big. So he had some big impactful moments. I think so. I wanted to go someone from the coverage unit. I thought Jordan Patelho was very good in the coverage unit.
Yeah, had a big block.
But yeah, I mean, as far as just the top specialist, as far as kicker, punter, snapper, it's a John Sott, Michael Vincent conversation.
Yes.
And I think Michael Vincent deserves a lot of credit here because he can't kick it or punt it, But can you name a time this year where the punt wasn't money this year?
The snap? Yeah.
Yeah.
No.
The snap wasn't money where it wasn't right where it needed to be.
Short or long snaps.
Or high. Or, I mean, it was just always bam. It was right there. It's one of the most consistent snappers I've ever seen. He deserves a lot of credit for that. But the job John Sott did was outstanding this year, Vince. You're absolutely correct. I mean, he was so steady. And, every punter's going to have one here or there that you're like, dude, come on now. You got to do better than that. But for the most part, Vince, he was so steady.
Yeah.
And, the Zach Yoakum kid was really good on kickoffs this year. I mean, outside of field goal kicking, the specialists were really outstanding this year.
I agree.
Zach Yoakum was really good. Michael Vincent was phenomenal as a snapper.
Coming back.
The coverage units were good. It was a really good group. I'd say Prince Colley and Jordan Patel were the two best guys for me from a impact in the coverage units and the attack units and things like that. Isaiah Foskey had 2 blocked punts this year as well.
Foskey credit there too.
But I just think those are the guys that they all deserve a little bit of credit in some capacity for me. And Bo Bauer would have been there in the conversation if he doesn't get hurt.
Sure.
I mean, there's no doubt. He blocked the punt this year as well. In what, did he play half a year? Right? How many games did Bo play this year?
Did he?
He played 5 games. Didn't even play half a year.
Not even half.
And still had an impact. So I just loved what I saw from the special teams units this year. There's no question. No doubt about it. So, Vince, let's do some team stuff here to wrap up.
All right.
We're going to have some fun. We're going to talk about biggest win, toughest loss, turning point of the season. Then we're going to go biggest offensive play, biggest defensive play, and then the one big takeaway from 2022 that we're going to have. So let's first talk, Vince, about the biggest play. What was the biggest play? So it can be most impressive play. It can be the most impactful in the game play. However you want to go with it, Vince. I know this was a tough one. Because you don't want to, you're trying to rack through like an entire season worth of plays.
Yeah, are we going to do? Are we going to do biggest play and then we're going to break it down to biggest offensive and biggest defensive?
Yeah, we're going. Okay, good. Yeah, we're doing offense first. Yeah, for this. Yeah.
So you want offense. You don't want biggest overall and then offense and then defense.
Offense and defense, and then we'll do the same thing for.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Biggest offensive play is tough for me because. There just wasn't a whole lot of like offensive plays.
It could be best too, really like if it was like a crazy catch.
So that's the direction that I'm going, Brian. I'm going to go with 2 of them. There was the catch by Jayden Thomas against BYU where he caught it on the kid's back for a touchdown, and then also the behind the back for Lindsey against Navy, I believe. Those were the 2 most amazing catches of the season.
I would say Michael Mayer had one like that against, I think it was Cal. Okay. That was similar to that.
So you can throw him in there too, as far as I'm concerned. But just when they catch it behind the defender like that, that's awesome. Like, I mean, there's a little bit of luck. There's a lot of skill. There's just a lot of timing. There's so many things that have to go right on that one. So those are mine for offense because it just didn't. Yeah, those are mine for offense.
I'm going to kind of do a 2-part. I think the Braden Lindsey of all those plays, the Braden Lindsey one to me was the craziest.
That was nuts.
It was just insane. The biggest play for me is I'm going to kind of go with impactful. And it was recent. Logan Diggs catching that little slide and then just outrunning the defense to me ultimately led to that win. You're down 24-10. You've made mistakes. You've turned the ball over. You've had a pick 6. You're getting thoroughly outplayed by South Carolina. I said to a couple people, I think they're so lucky to be down to only 24-17 at halftime. But it was that play that did it. Because it's not a guarantee. The way the offense was playing, it's not a guarantee if you get tackled at the 25 that they get points. It's not a guarantee.
Right.
That play was so huge because that, to me, sparked the energy in the stadium and the energy on that Notre Dame sideline completely changed after that play. And so to me, that was the most impactful play of the season on offense. You go back and look through the games and there were some impressive plays here and there, but like you look at the games this year, Vince, and it's like, I can't point to a play that you look at throughout the season and say, boy, this play just on offense just changed the course of the game. I mean, there really wasn't that play against Clemson. It was special teams and defense that changed the game against Clemson.
We'll talk about those. Don't worry.
Right. I mean, it just there weren't a lot of those plays for Notre Dame this year. That play to me is why you finished 9-4 instead of 8-5.
Mm-hmm.
Like, to me. Now, you had to follow it up with other things, but you don't get to those other areas without that play. It just – because it not only impacted the scoreboard, but it just impacted the complete energy in the state. That was a very pro-South Carolina crowd, and it was a big crowd. And just the whole momentum change. Just the whole momentum change with that play.
Did you feel like there were more people in the stands for the Gator Bowl than there were for last year's Fiesta Bowl?
Yes. It may not have been that way.
I was disappointed in the fan. Not the fans that were there, but like just the empty seats at the Fiesta Bowl last year.
There was only 49,500 fans at the Fiesta Bowl last year. Now, part of this is because of South Carolina.
Yes,
I mean,
absolutely.
there were 67. There were fewer Notre Dame fans in the stands on Saturday than there were at Fiesta Bowl last year.
Agreed, wholeheartedly.
Yeah, and that's another topic for another day. I'm so sick of Notre Dame fans complaining about this, that, and the other, and it's like, where are you? And I mean, what? Well, it's a Gator Bowl. Gator Bowl's a pretty big deal, and you're still a fan of the team, right? You know, so. Well, it's so much closer to South Carolina. I keep hearing about how there's Notre Dame fans all over the country.
Right.
You're telling me there's not enough to get more than 15,000 Notre Dame fans in that stadium? I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it.
I'm with you.
But it was a great game. It was a great game to be at, and the Notre Dame fans that were there did a pretty good job. They weren't super loud, but they did a pretty good job. They were just so spread out.
Yeah,
because there was even a lot of South Carolina people in the Notre Dame section, because that means a lot of Notre Dame fans sold their tickets, is what that means. So, shocker. I know, right? But that play to me was huge. Defensively, Vince,
this was easy.
Yeah,
for me.
You had two.
There was. Right? I have
Which
two.
one are you going with?
Well, I'm going with the first one because that was the most impactful. There was. What did you say? You said something to me about like the biggest moment. And so the second one is my biggest moment. So the first one is my biggest defensive play. So the biggest defensive play for me was the Brandon Joseph pick six versus Syracuse. First play of the game. You know, we had just gotten done talking about, you know, this could be a potential trap game for Notre Dame and all of these different things. And right off the bat, first play of the game, it's a pick six. And I hate to say it after 6 seconds, but it just felt like that game over. Like Notre Dame's got this one.
Yeah,
like,
I don't know if it was game over, but for sure, Vince, it was okay. This game is good because that crowd was loud.
Yes,
they were.
Absolutely.
I mean, that was a ranked Syracuse team. Notre Dame had kind of gotten through a really ugly win over UNLV where they just played sloppy football. UNLV just isn't good.
You had Clemson the next week.
Like you were still feeling the sting of the Stanford loss because it was just 2 weeks prior. Two games prior. You got USC, you got Clemson coming up the next week. Syracuse had just taken Clemson down to the wire, outplayed Clemson really for most of that game, and you're like, man, this is going to be an interesting game the way that Notre Dame's playing right now. And I felt like it took so much pressure off the Notre Dame offense. That play took so much pressure off the Notre Dame offense because it's like, hey, look, we're going to get – now they ended up giving a drive up the very next series for a touchdown, but imagine if you didn't make that play, Vince, and they go down and score a touchdown on that first series, and all of a sudden it's 7-0, and you're like, here we go again. But, yeah, I thought that was a big one. For me, Vince, I'm going with the other play. I'm going to go in the other direction. I'm going to go with the play that you were kind of going with for the best moment, and that was the Benjamin Morrison pick. But I'm not going to go with well, actually, you know what? I'm actually probably not going with the play that you think I'm going with, Vince.
No.
Yeah, I'm going to go a little bit different. It's not that one. It's the first interception that he made.
The one against Klubnik?
Yes. To me, that was such a brilliantly defended play for Notre Dame that I just felt like that so changed the momentum of that game. Because if you think about it, at that point in time, Vince, it was what, 14-0, I believe is what it was. It was 14-0. And Notre Dame, it was, fourth quarter, Notre Dame's up 14-0, Clemson getting the ball, and you're just like, man, you're just letting this team hang around. You're just letting them hang around. They bring in the freshman quarterback. You'd scored 7 points on offense the first 3 quarters. Because remember, the first touchdown was off of a blocked punt. And you're thinking, man, and then when he picks that ball off at like the 11-yard line, that completely changed that game. That's when the route was that point. And so I thought that was a defining win because I really feel like if you don't make that play, I still feel like Clemson would have come back and made that a game because you're only up 14-0 in the fourth quarter, Vince. And then that pick led to the second pick because now Clemson's got to press. Now they're down 21-0. Now they have to throw the ball. Now the game is on DJ's shoulders, and that's not where you want to be for Clemson. And then that led to the pick six. So the pick six was the backbreaker. It was the previous interception where he was chasing the crossing route and then undercut it and picked it off.
Right.
That was the more impressive. I mean, the pick six, the run back was the more impressive part. I mean, he was in good
it wasn't
position
a great,
on the interception. It was a terrible throw.
It was a terrible throw. No doubt about it.
And he was where he needed to be.
Right.
But the first interception was a tremendous play. Just a phenomenal play.
Absolutely. No, that was a better defensive play. But that's why I picked the second one as my best moment.
Right.
Because
that was pretty cool,
when you have an opportunity to just kind of – because as soon as he caught it and Shipley missed the tackle, which was within like the first 10 yards, right? As soon as that happened, it's like he's going all the way. So you have that entire length of the field to like enjoy it. You know what I mean? Because – let's be honest, football plays, like they average like 6 seconds. You know what I mean? 7 seconds. You got to enjoy that entire run back. And yes, we were working in the press box.
Oh, we were fired up.
There was no cheering, but like I enjoyed, like that was the best
There was a couple pounds on the table for me. I'm not going to lie on that.
Yeah, man. Like I got to enjoy that whole time. And so like moment-wise, like that was the biggest moment for me to just enjoy it and revel in the fact that Notre Dame just dominated Clemson.
Yeah.
Like just dominated.
Well, and that was the finishing touch. Like,
yes,
when was the last time Notre Dame played a team like this, like that?
Right.
And just put the game away in that fashion. Where it's like you're watching the game, Vince, and there's still 12 minutes left in the game, and you're thinking, this is over.
Yeah.
This is over. I mean, you kind of felt that when they went up 21-0. But that moment where like the game is now officially over.
Yes.
Like they are going to wipe Clemson off the map in this game. Because honestly, you know what it felt like, Vince? It felt like for me, it wasn't just that game is over. I felt like Benjamin Morrison officially put the final nail in the coffin of the Clemson dynasty.
Yeah. I hope so.
That's what I felt like. I said that to you.
I know you
I
did.
think I looked at you and said at the time, I was like, that Clemson's now officially done. Notre Dame, everybody says that Clemson, their rise started with the win over Notre Dame. I disagree. I think it was against Ohio State the year before in the Orange Bowl. That's when I think Clemson truly put themselves on the map. But everybody it was 2 years prior against Ohio State. Everybody attributes to the Notre Dame game. And I think you could say the final hurdle for them was that Notre Dame win. And Notre Dame is the team that killed them.
Yeah.
That officially putting out, last year they saw it. But that game to me, where Clemson just went out and got dominated, was it for them. It's like last year, Vince, they weren't very good last year, but they never got blown out. I mean, they lost by a touchdown to Georgia in a game where Georgia didn't score a single offensive point. They lost in overtime to NC State, and they lost by 10 to Pittsburgh in a game that, was mostly competitive throughout the game. But Notre Dame just wiped them off the map and beat them in a way that game where this is what you're supposed to be good at, stopping the run and all that, and we still beat you.
Yeah.
And then that was the final coffin. So I thought that play from a momentum standpoint, Vince, from a moment standpoint, you're going to look back and say, when did Clemson die? When did the Clemson dynasty die? It was when Benjamin Morrison crossed the goal line to wipe Clemson out. They were never the same team after that, Vince. They weren't. I mean, DJ never recovered from that.
No, I mean, he's not. That game. He doesn't go to Clemson anymore. So
no,
I mean,
he never recovered from that, in my opinion. So that's the moment for me. Let's kind of stay in lines with it, Vince. What was the turning point of the season, in your opinion? Because it's for both of us, it's going to be kind of the same kind of moment. But what was the turning point of the season for you, Vince?
Well, for me, the turning point of the season, it's the Clemson game. It was the win against Clemson because, there was a lot of turmoil, obviously, going into that game, based on everything that had happened up to that point, right? I mean, they started 0-2, Ohio State, Marshall. They lost to Stanford of all, and that was still, I don't care what anybody says, that was still fresh in my mind when they're going to play Clemson. right?
Dude, it's still fresh in my mind.
Right, exactly. Seriously.
Yes.
And so going into the Clemson game, I was like, okay, this season could still take a turn for the worse because you still got Clemson in front of you. You still had Southern Cal. We still had Boston College, which I realized at the end of the day, they weren't all that great. I get that. But there was still a lot riding on that Boston College game at that point. And so the season could have taken a serious turn to the negative, right?
Oh, yeah.
And not only the fact that they beat Clemson at home and all of that, but the manner and when you just poetically described how all that went down. But the way that they beat Clemson, the fact that they beat Clemson, that was the turning point. I mean, it just was. And there's no other way to slice it. I mean, Clemson was the turning point in the season.
It was. I mean, it just having that win under your belt. I mean, Clemson's not going to finish in the top 10 because they lost their last 2 of their last 3 games, but they're still going to finish in the top 15. And they are a top 10 team if they beat Notre Dame. I mean, that's the reality of it. It was a signifying moment to this football team that, hey, guys, when we play, and Marcus Freeman said after the game, I've been telling y'all all year, you're a really good football team. You just don't play like a really good football team.
Yeah.
And that was that moment because like even the USC game, they got outplayed at quarterback and there were some issues with defensive coordinator, but like they battled. That wasn't like Stanford. That wasn't like Marshall. They were just got beat by a better team that day. It's not excusable because there were things you could have done to make it a more competitive game, but I mean, you didn't have Cam Hart. You didn't have Tariq Bracy. You know, you didn't have – I mean, you didn't have your starting quarterback, if we're being honest. You know, they were just – you're just kind of like, this isn't who knows. And they still battled with USC. But that game, to me, is a blowout if they don't lose to Clemson because I don't think that team would have checked out. I think a lot of veterans would have checked out by that point in time. And that win was and it's also that win where Marcus Freeman can kind of build his foundation upon. Like, hey, when we want, and then you can like say, imagine what we could do if we had a quarterback that could throw the football in that game.
Yeah,
because that's the thing that meant so much to me about that game, Vince, was that you did that to them, and you didn't even go after the weakness of their team. Like South Carolina and Tennessee both took advantage of the part that's bad about Clemson. They beat up their secondary, which stinks.
Yep.
Notre Dame didn't even throw for 100 yards that game.
Had 85 yards.
They went right at what is supposed to be the best part of what Clemson is.
Yes, correct.
The vaunted defensive line, the front seven, and all those kind of things. And you look at it and say, they said, we don't care. We're going to go right at the thing you do best, and we're going to dominate you.
Because it's what we do best.
Yes.
I mean, it was about, to me, it was about Notre Dame.
What we do best is better than anything you do.
Exactly. It was about Notre Dame. Like, we're not going to try to scheme you and do some crazy crap just to score some points. We're going to do what we do, and it's going to be better than what you do.
Right.
And that was the story of that game. And so that's why it's a turning point to me. And a lot of people are saying North Carolina. North Carolina was a great win for Notre Dame, but then they lost to Stanford. Like, that's not a turning point. And you could say, well, they lost to USC, but they lost to USC differently than they lost to Stanford.
USC is also a top 10 team.
Correct.
I mean, they're about to win their 11th game
12th
right now against
12th game.
So they went 11-1 during the regular season, right?
Mm-hmm.
And lost the chance. So 12-2. That's a different animal. They should have beat Stanford by 40. You know, like, it's not the same. And again, I think that the North Carolina game, they're better than North Carolina.
Yes.
They're significantly so. They're significantly better than every team that there's 3 teams they played this year that they didn't have significantly better players than, and that was USC, Ohio State, and Clemson. I think the other thing too that's a turning point too is if let's say Notre Dame beats Stanford and then loses to Clemson, the narrative of 9-4 is completely different.
Oh, absolutely.
Because you went 9-4, but who'd you beat?
Right.
I beat North Carolina. You mean the team that lost like 4 of their last 4 games and couldn't beat anybody and couldn't stop anybody? That's the win you're hanging. BYU, that's the win you're hanging your hat on. The Clemson game gave you that win where you can say, when you are doing what you're capable of, you're that.
Right. And Notre Dame has not had an issue with North Carolina.
Mm-mm.
Like North Carolina, for all the good things that they've done, the quarterbacks that they've had, and the success they've had offensively, when they play Notre Dame, they don't do well. Right. Notre Dame has had North Carolina's number. Right. And so beating North Carolina, to me, And maybe this is an elitist attitude as a Notre Dame fan. They should beat North Carolina.
Sure. They weren't even ranked at the time, and they didn't finish the season ranked.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, that's just the reality of it. Same with BYU. BYU's not that good.
No.
Right? And now North Carolina's a talented team, but Notre Dame should beat North Carolina. Yes. North Carolina's not at the point yet where they should go. Now, they should also beat Stanford. They should also beat Marshall.
No doubt about it.
But at least this way with the Clemson game, you have that win where you can point to and say, hey, this is what you're capable of when you play your game.
Right.
And I think that's why that mattered. So what was a tough – before we get in – well, I guess –
go ahead.
That's also the biggest win. I mean –
absolutely.
So we've kind of talked a lot about the Clemson game. It was the biggest win for you, right?
Yes.
I'm going to go in a different direction here. So I want to quickly talk about the toughest loss because I don't spend a lot of time on this because I'm just getting mad. I think a lot of people might pick Marshall. Vince, you and I both picked Stanford.
It's 100% Stanford for me. I number one, I think Marshall's a better team than Stanford, but that's neither
much.
I mean, that's
better team than
that's neither here nor
Marshall's
there.
a 9-win team this year.
Right.
Stanford won 3 games?
Right. And there's a way. I mean, I'm not explaining away the Marshall loss because you can't explain.
There's no excuse for losing to Marshall.
No excuse.
No excuse. But you can at least say that's a 9-4 team.
Right.
Right. Like it's a bad loss, but it's kind of like Tulsa 2010. Inexcusable loss, but it's like it's a 10. The Tulsa team was 11 wins that year. This Marshall team was 9 wins. No excuse for it. But Stanford sucks.
Yes.
Marshall, in my opinion, if they played Stanford in a bowl game, would smack them.
Yes.
And Stanford's awful.
Stanford hadn't beaten a Division I football team or a Power 5 football team in over a
calendar year.
Over a year. And Notre Dame just laid down and just took it. Like that was just awful on so many levels. And then you add into it the fact that you play these guys every year. Like there's nothing they threw at you that you should not have expected. You play them every year. You have had their number for the last few years because they're not good. They don't even have a head coach anymore. Like their head coach stepped down after this season because of how poor of a program that they were running and what a bad team they were, but they beat Notre Dame.
Yeah.
It's Stanford all day long. It's Stanford.
Because also if you beat Stanford and the rest of the season plays out the way that it does, you're a 10-3 team. And 2 of those losses were at the very beginning of the year as you were kind of getting used to your new coach and your court, and all that kind of stuff. You could kind of almost explain those away a little bit, kind of the way people did when USC started 1-3 in 2016. And you could say, man, Notre Dame was as good as anybody in the country for the most part. They played like a top 10 team in the last, what'd be, they'd play 13 games. So the last 11 games of the year, you're talking about, you're saying you played as well. You were a top 10 team in the last 11 games of the year if you beat Stanford. That's the argument you can make. And the Stanford game completely changed that. I mean, this team looks so much different, even with the USC 10-3.
Yeah.
You won 10 of your last 11 games. You lost to a playoff team in a game where you led over half the game. You could explain away the Marshall game. Let down from Ohio State. Now, again, inexcusable, but you can explain it. There's no justification for it.
There's just not.
Yeah.
There's just not. It was that bad. It was that unexpected. There was just so many things that were bad about it. I just don't even know how to get into it and put a positive spin on it. There's no positive spin to put on it. Not that there's a positive spin to put on Marshall either. Those are both really bad losses, guys. I mean, there's no debate of that. It's just, it was just so much worse. It was just so much worse.
Yeah, it really was. It really was. Biggest win, however, Vince, you went with Clemson. Okay? I did. We talked about the importance of the Clemson win. I'm going to go a different direction, though. The Clemson win was the turning point, but I'm going to look big picture. I think the biggest win was the South Carolina win. It was not the biggest win over the best team. It wasn't the turning point, but I still believe that this season is looked at completely differently because of how the season ended. If you go 8-5 down the stretch, and you're a team that goes out there and loses to South Carolina, yes, they're ranked higher than you and all that other kind of stuff. But the reality is that's a team that just flat out you should have beat. Just flat out a team you should have beat. And you lose to them, your season's 8-5. the Clemson game doesn't matter as much anymore. It takes some of that shine off. I thought that was the best win. I thought, they went in there there was no Foskey, there was no Michael Mayer, there's no Cam Hart, all that kind of stuff. There's none of that stuff. And it allowed you to kind of go into the offseason winners of 6 of 7, or no, it would have been 6 of 7. Your only losses to a team that's going to be the Cotton Bowl champs, Pac-12 runner-up, top 10 team on the road, and just completely changed. I think you go into the offseason with a lot more momentum now because of that game. And I think that game also, to me, was the perfect depiction of this football team as a whole. Not always pretty, doesn't quite play to its potential for 60 minutes or for the course of a season. You're going to have some sloppiness. You're going to have some what is that moments. But this team responds to adversity and finishes, like, if you think about it, how'd the season end? Really bad start to the year. 21-7 first quarter deficit. Then you come roaring back, and it looks like you're about to turn the season completely around. You lose to Stanford, right? It's 38-31. You're about to put the game away. You throw a pick 6, right? That's the Stanford game of that game. But then you finish strong, and the difference in this game compared to the season is you didn't have the slip up against USC. You went up 45-38. You didn't have that moment where you let them go back down the field and score. You put it away. And that was the key for me.
Yeah.
Is it completely changed the season around to see this team's ability to get punched in the face and go down and then bounce back. Losing to Marshall could have killed that season, and they didn't let it. Losing to Stanford could have killed that season, and they didn't let it. Losing to USC could have killed their season, and they didn't let it. Falling behind 21-7 to South Carolina could have killed their season, and they didn't let it. That, to me, is something that I love to see from this football team, was just that ability to overcome adversity and flash potential. Because that's the biggest takeaway from the whole season is when this team is on, they're really good. Sure. When they're not, they're not. Now you've just got to be more consistent. And I thought that we saw that in this game. And it was nice to see some younger players stepping up. I mean, it's funny. Last year, Brian Kelly kept whining about how young they were on offense. And you had a 6th-year senior guard, a 5th-year senior at right tackle, a senior at left tackle or center, a junior at left guard. You had a 5th-year senior at quarterback. You had a junior who was coming off a 1,000-yard season at running back. I could go on and on and on and on about how they were not young last year. This team started 8 freaking true sophomores in the bowl game against South Carolina. And did you hear Notre Dame talk about that once in the bowl prep? I didn't. Did you hear one time that Tom Reese or Marcus Freeman lowered the expectation for the offense? Because, guys, we're starting 8 sophomores and a quarterback who's got 2 career starts. Like, let's not get to – no, it was this is the expectation.
Right.
8
never
true
wavered.
Sophomores, including quarterback, both offensive tackle spots, every receiver spot, running back. You were only experienced at guard and center. That's it. The inside of your defense. And then who was the first guy you brought off the bench at receiver? A freshman. Now, did some veterans step up and make plays? Absolutely. Absolutely. Braden Lindsey stepped up and made some big plays. But Chris Tyree had the big 3rd down conversion late in the game that allowed them to get that go-ahead drive. I mean, people forget they're in long field goal range for Blake Grupe at the game tied 38-38 before Chris Tyree makes that play on that little slide play. So your veteran stepped up, but that was a game that was dominated by your young guys. Your backs are sophomores, your tackles, your quarterback. And, so this team has potential, and that's why I'm excited about this offseason. But it's also the excitement is not there if you lose that game.
Right.
So that, to me, is why South Carolina was the biggest win of the year. Most important win of the year. I think if we go with the biggest win, what was the best win? It's Clemson, clearly. But most important win is where I'm going with this one for the South Carolina game, Vince. What are your thoughts on that?
I agree with you wholeheartedly, and I had that as a close second. I actually wrote that down. I said South Carolina is a close second because of everything that you just said. I think it means more now moving forward, right? And there's some things you could explain away if they ended up losing that game. well, they did beat Clemson, they did this, they did that, but at the same time, 8-5 is so much different than 9-4, and I think that is legit. I mean, that's something that has to be talked about. This is still an SEC team. As much as Shane Beamer wants you to think that he just found guys in the parking lot and suited them up for the game, I mean, it's still an SEC team.
They weren't putting walk-ons on the field in place of the guys that were out. Come on now.
And
Notre Dame didn't play the game without two guys that were more prolific than anyone in the history of the school at what they do, and Isaiah Foskey and Michael Mayer. Come on.
Exactly.
Come on.
And so that we'll talk more about specifically this game later on tonight when we do upon further review, obviously. But that was a huge win for Notre Dame. And you can talk about offseason momentum. You can talk about a lot of different things. And we're going to talk about Marcus Freeman and what we've learned from Marcus Freeman over the season. I learned a lot about Marcus Freeman in this one game. And it's a microcosm of the entire season, to be honest with you. And we're going to talk about that more later on this week. But, man, it was just a situation where if it's a completely different narrative if they lose this game.
Mm-hmm.
And they ended up pulling it out in wonderful fashion. So, I agree with you completely. It was a close second for me, to talk about South Carolina. So I'm glad you got an opportunity to do that.
Yeah, because we talked a lot about it in Clemson, and that game was so important. So important. It was the biggest win of the year.
Yeah.
It just, to me, that game loses a lot of its sting if you beat South Carolina. If you don't beat South Carolina, in my opinion.
Yeah.
There's no doubt. So, Vince, that's going to do it for this portion of the show. We're going to have a mailbag next. We have some questions. Want to have more of you kind of bring those things up. If you have some, we started some already. We have about 19 questions in so far. But before we move on to the mailbag, I want to thank you all really for just a phenomenal year. We put these numbers up on the website the other day, Vince. We had 3 times as many page views to our website and our message board than we did last year. We had tremendous growth. We were about a little over 6,000 subscribers last year at this time on YouTube. We're over 13 now. We had this past month, we had over 4 million views to our website. Our highest ever before that was like 2.9. So just tremendous, tremendous growth. We're so happy to be doing this, and we're just getting started. We've got a lot of plans that we're hoping to enact and get things going. Going to make some new hires that we think is going to help us put out a lot better content. I'm excited about it, but we're able to make those hires because of y'all's support, and that's the reality of it. And my promise will never change. If you all support us and we grow and we are financially better off than we were the year before, that's going to get reinvested back in the company. And that's what we're going to do here over the next 12 months. And I'm excited for what's coming. But we really didn't have a year-end show. So I wanted to kick the year off because I'm excited for this 2023. Because if it's anything like 2024 Vince or 2022, it's going to be a fun year. Like we were expecting December to have fewer page views because last year in December was like you had the Brian Kelly who just left.
Oh, yeah.
Marcus Freeman getting hired. You had all these things going on. You had the Fiesta Bowl, and we had even more page views this year than we did last year.
Crazy.
By a lot.
Yeah.
So it just it's very exciting.
And podcast downloads and the whole thing.
Oh, they're insane. Yeah, we had 1.47 million podcast downloads in 2021. We had over 3.5 million on just the Irish Breakdown podcast alone in 2022. So we can't thank you all enough for just being there with us through this whole thing and this community that we've built. It's been beyond what Vince and I always knew we'd get here, but it was more like in 3, 4, 5 years from now we'd get to where we are now. So it's been a fun ride. It's been a very, very fun ride. So just want to thank you all for that. But before we get to the mailbag, folks, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast. Please leave us a 5-star review if you're listening via podcast platform, and be sure to sign up for the message boards at boards@irishbreakdown.com. Definitely want to be a part of what we got going on there. Going to have some intel. Got some intel about the transfer stuff and a transfer that we expect to be on campus this week as a visitor. Got some intel on the board about that. We'll always continue to try to drop as much intel as we can on there for sure. And of course, subscribe to the CFB Nation podcast app. Don't just assume it's always going to show up on the IB feed. It is there for now, but eventually we're going to take it off the IB feed. And you're definitely going to want to make sure you're subscribed to the CFB Nation podcast platform. It's mailbag time, Mr. D'Addario. Let's jump into that and get into this. If you have some mailbag questions, let us know. There's one mailbag question here that I want to start off for Vince, because we're not going to have time to get to it now, but this is from Broke Neck Boy. I would love for you to bring this back on Friday for our mailbag. This would be a great Friday free-for-all mailbag question. So if you can remember this, Vince, if maybe you can screenshot this a little bit, or if Broke Neck Boy, you can bring this back on Friday, this would be an entire mailbag right now. But we don't, and I want to kind of really think about it and do justice, but that'd be a fun question to get into. So we want to bring that back. Vince just screenshotted it, so we'll have it. We'll hopefully have it saved. So that's huge. So great question. I just wanted you to know we're not going to get to it now because it's just, I want to do some research on that one, man. Like I want to have some fun with that one. So hopefully, Broke Neck Boy, you bring that back on Friday for our mailbag. It's a really, really good question. Let's go to Milton Fan 15. Should we expect more Benjamin Morrison newcomers with the players Marcus Freeman is recruiting? Vince? I think absolutely. I mean, look, the talent level they've added on this. Look, I know a lot of Notre Dame fans are really down on this season because of the fact that they lost the guys at the end that they lost. I get that. I really, really, really do get that. But the reality is, if you look at just what they were, they had a great recruiting class. I'll say this, and we're going to do a show on this in January, probably maybe February around signing day when all the classes are done. But I still have not found 5 classes that I would trade for Notre Dame's. I haven't found more than 2, if I'm being honest about it. But I get the whole being down on it. But Vince, the talent level, I mean, your corner class is outstanding. Your linebacker class is outstanding. People are disappointed about a D-line class that has 4 guys that were ranked as top 200 recruits. You know what I mean? Like, it's the best receiver class you've had in a long time.
I get why people
because you look at what you lost. You didn't. There's no Keon. There's no Jason Moore.
The foam got taken off the top. I get
it. Yeah, I get it. If you just look at the 4 you got, it's a pretty good 4-man group. You know what I mean? Tight end. You got another good tight end. You got another elite running back, in my opinion, top 50 player. You got a big-time quarterback. You got a great receiver class. You got one of the 3 or 4 best offensive line hauls in the country. Like, there's a lot to be excited about, and there's a lot more dynamic ability in these groups.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I definitely do. And I said last year, there was more 5-star upside guys in last year's class than there had been in a while, and there's more 5-star upside guys in this class than there was in last year's class.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just because of the talent that they're bringing in is very impressive. So, yeah. I would say so. Now, does that mean that there's going to be a bunch of guys that come in next year and are freshman All-Americans? I don't know what opportunities are going to be there for that, Vince. But certainly there's impact guys that are being brought in.
Yeah.
Brandon Plensner says, how surprised are you about the recent rumors surrounding LSU? Now we know why Keyshawn Boutte declared for the draft. So I'm not going to comment on what happened in this format. It's on the message board.
Is it okay?
I'm pretty sure that it's true because of the sources that we've heard it from.
Yeah.
Am I surprised? No, it's LSU. This is
right.
All the LSU fans got their feelings hurt and got all puckered up when I said that Brian Kelly inherited a dumpster fire. This is exactly the kind of crap that goes on at LSU with the.
And I don't even blame Brian Kelly, to be perfectly honest with you.
I blame Brian Kelly because that coach should not have been allowed to coach another second at your school. Now I've been told he's going to be gone after the year.
And then I put that in our little message we were talking. I was like, that's the problem. That is the problem.
Yes.
Once you find these things out, bye-bye.
They're all gone. They're all gone. You can't coach another game.
No.
And then, because what they're going to do is they're going to try to brush it under the rug. But that's not going to happen now because it's out. All right. They're going to try to sweep it under the rug, and they're going to have ESPN's help because ESPN won't talk about it. Let's be real about that.
Oh, not a chance.
But there's going to be enough people to talk about it that he's not going to be able to sweep it under the rug. He should not have let that guy coach today. Should not.
No.
And but it's pretty ridiculous. Just like, are you surprised? No, it's freaking LSU. Why would I be surprised by that? Was I taken aback when I first heard it? Yeah,
yes, I was too.
That's just not a normal thing that you hear about,
No, it's not.
But it's definitely not surprising when you consider where it was. So, yeah. John A1, Who could be the better switch to safety in 2023, Clarence Lewis or Ryan Barnes? I'll let you take a first crack at that, Vince.
Well, you and I are very much on the same page when it comes to Clarence Lewis and where we see his future at Notre Dame. Part of that is because of the talent that is now in the corner room. And part of it is just because I think his abilities and his talent level and where he is deficient at some things, it just fits at safety, where some of those deficiencies, I'm not saying they become positives at safety, but they are not as exploited at safety as they would be at corner. And I think he's still a good player. I think he's still a great player to have on this team, but I think his natural position at Notre Dame needs to be safety. And there is a prime opportunity right now to move to that spot. And so with this particular, possibility between Lewis and Barnes, Barnes is longer, he's got more wingspan, that kind of a thing. Obviously, he hasn't taken to corner as much as I personally had hoped that he would. He's getting passed up by guys that are younger than he is, and there's another crop coming in as true freshmen. I wouldn't be opposed to moving both of them, but at the same time, I still think Clarence Lewis is the better fit.
I think Ryan Barnes could be the more impactful player, but Ryan Barnes is having struggles getting on the field for a lot of reasons. I think the more impactful, the better switch in 2023 is Clarence Lewis. I think Clarence Lewis is a good football player. I think in Bob Diaco's defense, Clarence Lewis could play corner. In this defense that wants to play man all the time, he's just not a corner.
Yeah.
And so I think what I don't like, Vince, is I don't like when you have a guy who's just like not good at a position that you say, well, just move him to safety, he'll be fine. No. Clarence does a lot of good things at corner when allowed to do things that fit with safety, keeping things in front of him being the main one.
Yeah.
You don't have to flip your hips and cover a lot in safety. That's what he's not good at.
Right. Exactly.
So that's why it's not like he's just not a very good corner and he's not athletic. Clarence Lewis is a pretty good athlete. He's just not fast.
Right. He's a cover.
And he's really smart and heady. Exactly.
Yeah.
He's a safety in this defense. Yes. And I think he could be a starting caliber safety in this defense. Now, one of the takeaways from the game that we'll talk about tonight was I was very impressed by the play of the safeties, especially the younger guys in the bowl game. I thought Ramon Henderson was pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
I thought Xavier Watts was really good. And if you could add a third guy in there in a Clarence Lewis type of player, then I feel really good about that. And I'm going to have an article coming up that Clarence Lewis is not the key to this. This is going to be the premise. And I'm going to probably write it today or tomorrow, probably tomorrow. But it's not Clarence Lewis that's the key to fixing the secondary in 2023. It's Chance Tucker. The premise is going to be you need Chance Tucker to emerge and prove himself worthy of being a guy that can flat out take over Clarence Lewis's role before you can move Clarence Lewis. You've got, as a coaching staff, you know what Clarence can do. Somebody's got to prove to you that they can be Clarence Lewis or better before you're going to be comfortable moving that other guy. And so that's why Chance Tucker having a really big offseason is going to give this staff the confidence, hey, we can move Clarence and not miss a beat at corner. That's, to me, very, very important. It could be Ryan Barnes, but as I said, Ryan's got some other things he's got to work on. Just getting out there and being healthy and getting some other things right. You know what I mean? Now, if it's Chance and Ryan, great, because I still love Ryan Barnes' talent. And I think he could be a really good corner or safety. I just want to make sure he's getting right first. And then, could be that guy. But Chance is more of a pure corner right now in the roles that Clarence Lewis would play. Ryan Barnes is more of a boundary corner. That's not Clarence. Clarence is a slot field guy at times late in the year. And to me, that's the role that you need someone to come in and provide some depth behind Cam Hart is going to be a key. All right. That's a good one. Michael, our friend from Germany, has a super chat. Thank you very much, sir. Cool show. Thanks to IB for that awesome coverage of the season. Keep on rocking like this. Happy New Year to all Irish around the world. Thank you very, very much. And
thanks, Michael.
You. Scott H wants to know, Vince, did he see you at the Notre Dame women's basketball game yesterday?
I was not at the Notre Dame women's basketball game because I woke up right around tip-off. So,
there's some Vince doppelganger walking around.
It's a little scary.
Good win yesterday, by the way.
It was a huge win. I mean, they dominated that game.
Well, and BC came into the game, 11-4, 11-3, something like that?
It was over after the first quarter.
Yeah.
I mean, that game was over.
Yeah.
So I watched it on TV, Scott, and but no, I was unfortunately not there. Although I do try to go to as many as I can.
And Indiana lost this week. They lost to Michigan State the other day. So Notre Dame now jumps into they now jump back into the top 4. The poll came out today, and they were in the because it was 85-48. BC came to that game 11-4. So yeah, that was a really, really, really good win. Really good win.
And they've got a kid who just enrolled early, the Prosper kid.
Yeah, Cass Prosper. She played really well too.
I know.
Well, that game was big, Vince, because obviously it was good to see. I didn't even think Olivia Miles played great. Like, she scored well, but she had as many turnovers she had assists in that game. Sonia Citron was really good, and your bigs didn't really give you a whole lot of production. But like, you had KK Bransford coming off the bench. She scored 17 points in 22 minutes. And then Cass Prosper comes out in her first, I believe this was her first game, right? Second game?
Second game.
Okay.
Yeah. I think she played down in Miami.
She played 4 minutes against Miami.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Feet
attempted
wet.
0 shots.
Right.
She comes into this game. It's her first home game, first real action of the season. She plays 17 minutes. She has 7 points, 9 rebounds, an assist, and 2 steals.
Yeah.
In the game, and hit a 3.
Right.
And she's a 6'2" wing is basically what she is. She's listed as a guard. She's more of a wing than she is a pure guard. But that was good to get those 2 young bucks that can just come out there and show that they can score in bunches. And so, you didn't have a big game from Lauren Ebo. You didn't have a big game from Maddie Westbeld. Miles was good, but not elite. 17 points, 6 rebounds, 5 assists.
Still won by like 40.
And won by 37.
Yeah, that's right.
And it was 49-16 at halftime.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So, yeah, they're rocking and rolling. There's no doubt.
That's going to be a fun one.
Yeah. Vanilla Chill with a question about Chris Tyree. Why does it look like he is one of the slowest running backs, but on paper he should be our fastest? Is it play style that is different, or is he just doesn't play as fast? I guess I don't agree with the entire premise.
I don't agree with that at all.
So I think when Chris Tyree gets the ball on anything other than duo, he looks pretty darn fast. He looked pretty fast getting to the edge on that 3rd down late in the game.
Yep.
So
he turned that up, man. And yeah, I think he was one guy away from breaking that thing. Like, that was, he is super fast, Vanilla Chill. I don't know what else to tell you on that one.
Yeah. Christopher Galloway with a question here. He says, a mailbag for Brian. Who do you think is the better athlete, Brandon Hillman or Ronan Hannafin? Boy, that's a good one. I think, Christopher, it kind of depends on what you're looking for. I think Ronan's faster. I think Ronan is bigger, certainly, than Brandon Hillman. Thicker, anyway. I think Brandon's a little bit more twitchy. He's a little bit more sudden. And I think he's a little bit more fluid than Ronan. That's a tough one, Vince. I think pound for pound, I'd probably lean towards Ronan pound for pound, but for what Brandon Hillman was recruited to do, I think landing Brandon Hillman was more impactful than Ronan Hannafin, because Ronan would have been another really good player at a position you're already strong. And Ronan could not have moved to safety the way that Ronan Hannafin will when they lost Peyton Bowen. He's more of a rover will linebacker if he plays defense, and he's a receiver if he plays offense. Whereas Brandon Hillman is more of a, boy, that ended up being a big need for you. Whether he can play, because what were your 2 losses? Safety and running back.
Right.
And he can play both of those. That's important. The other kid can't. And that, so that's kind of why I view that one the way that I view that one, Vince. So do you have an opinion on that? Did you watch enough film of those guys?
I did not. That? So that's why I defer to you on this one.
Charles Parsons said, asked this, what freshman on both sides of the ball will have the biggest impact? I think this is looking to 2023, Vince.
I agree with you. Yeah.
So Charles, boy, it's going to be a long list on offense. I mean, pick a receiver. They're all going to get a chance to play. Defensive, I mean, those are my top picks right now. I mean, Jeremiah Love could end up, especially if Darren Price isn't back fully healthy. But, I mean, any of the receivers. And then Charles Jagasaw is another one that I got my eye on, possibly pushing for a spot at guard next year if they're not able to get a grad transfer. Defensively, Vince, I think whether it's Brendan Vernon or Boubacar Traore, I think one of those 2 is going to end up playing and helping on defense next year. And then after that, it's one of the Drake Bowen or Jay Nosbury at linebacker for depth. I think you could look at a Don Schuler or Ben Minich for safety. I think Ben Minich is going to be a special teams guy like day one. I think he could be. I mean, man, there's so many guys that are gonna have a chance to play next year. The problem is none of them on defense are necessarily walking into great depth charts where, like put it like this: when you look at the freshmen, Benjamin Morrison, Jaden Mickey, they had to beat out Clarence Lewis. Well, Christian Gray and Micah Bell need to beat out Benjamin Morrison and Jaden Mickey.
Yeah,
it's going to be a lot tougher.
That's going to be real hard
than the other one. So I think that's why, like linebacker, I mean, who was there to keep Jalen Snead off the field this year other than the coaches?
Right.
Whereas next year, those linebackers are walking in a situation where all the veterans return, plus Prince Collins, plus Jalen Snead, plus Nolan Ziegler.
Everybody wanted to see this year.
Right.
Yeah, it's going to be
so
tough.
I think safety is the one where you could probably see somebody stepping up. Hillman, Schuler, or Minich stepping into one of those roles, I think is where I would probably look. And then one of the defensive linemen. Who they're going to be, I want to see how these guys look in the spring first, Charles, honestly. But those are just some of the positions. I think right now my focus would be more position-wise as opposed to specific player-wise. So that's why I say wide receiver, safety, and potentially linebacker would be where I would look next year. Now, I also won't be shocked, however, if Clarence Lewis moves to safety. I won't be shocked if one of the freshman corners makes a push for the starting nickel job in the slot. I would not be shocked by it. Antoine Porcher-Rideau says, Vince, when Alt and Fisher leave for the NFL, which one will be drafted first? So I'm going to assume by first he means highest.
Yes.
Because I think that Joe Alt will be drafted first because I think Joe Alt's going to end up going out a year sooner.
Oh, you think Fisher will
That's my prediction.
Stick around for 4 years?
I think Blake Fisher will come back. I think he'll need to come back. I think he'll be in Ronnie Stanley territory next year. Late first type of player. Where they'll say, boy, if we can just one more year out of you, you could be really special.
Mm-hmm.
I think Joe Alt's going to benefit from a couple things. Number one, he'll have played a lot more games because Joe Alt played over half a year in 2020.
Right.
I think the DNA, the pedigree, whether fair or not, NFL teams look at that stuff.
Absolutely. Right? That was going to be my argument.
Right. Fair or not, valid or not, that's just that's the reality of it.
Well, and they also look at these All-America lists and all these different things. And Joe Alt is just raking them in right now as far as those postseason accolades.
Well, he's just a better player right now.
I'm not. There's no debate. I'm with you 100%.
The other part too with it, Vince, is Joe is more suited for what the NFL is right now, which is a pass blocking league, right?
Correct.
Where Blake has got to still, that part of his game is still evolving. Blake is a really good pass blocker now because he's really talented. Not so much because the technique is there. Because again, why? He didn't grow up with a Kansas City Chief Ring of Famer,
right?
Offensive line dad, right? That's not a knock. I mean, the Fishers have done a great job raising Blake as a young man, but his dad's not a former 10-year NFL veteran offensive tackle that could teach him how to play the game. He could teach him how to be a man, and they did a great job of that.
Right.
But now it's about developing him as a player, and I think he'll need that extra year. I think now, would it shock me if Blake has a big offseason and comes out next year and ends up being their best lineman? Nope.
Not at all.
Nope. I just think as of right now, I just feel like it's a situation where they need to – Joe Alt will be picked first. Now, the other part of it too is Joe Alt's a left tackle, and I don't think Blake is going to be viewed as a left tackle. But that's also why I think it might be good for Blake to come back for a fourth year if Joe leaves next year, because what they'll do is they'll just slide Blake over to left tackle, I would assume, and then start Jagasaw or somebody else that next year at right tackle. And then Blake does get that year at left tackle under his belt. And then all of a sudden maybe he could end up being that higher pick. But I think right now, Joe Alt's looking like a potential top 5 pick next year, Vince. Top 5 to 10 pick next year.
Yep.
So, Milton Fan 15. Likelihood there are 3,000-yard rushers next year. I'd say that's pretty low.
Low. Because that's a lot of production. Number one.
Has that ever even happened?
Ever? Like anywhere?
Yeah. I'm going to look and see. Has there ever been three?
That's a lot of production,
1,000-yard rushers in college.
And not only is it a lot of production, but it's a lot of balanced production, which is tough sometimes. I mean, it just is, right?
It happened once, and not at the Power 5 level.
Okay.
And it
like
was
Citadel or something like that?
No, it was Nevada in 2000 and Nevada in 2000 and it was 1 year with Colin Kaepernick.
I was going to say it had to be Kaepernick.
Yeah. Yep.
So it was a quarterback and 2 running backs.
Right. Well, he didn't say 3 running backs.
I know he didn't. Right? I know, but I mean, everybody assumes that Buckner's not going to start. So, it feels
We've
like
seen a lot of teams with 2,000-yard rushers. I mean,
absolutely.
Oklahoma had that. Remember the year that they played for the title against Florida? We've seen that a lot.
North Carolina had it.
Yeah. Clemson had that in 2016 or 2015, I believe. Didn't Deshaun Watson run for over 1,000 yards in 2015? I thought he did. Yeah, 1,105. Yeah, so I mean, we've seen that 2 in a lot. Getting 3, that would be
that'd be very difficult.
Yeah, like here's an example: the year Clemson had 2 guys, their third leading rusher had 234 yards.
Exactly. There's a fall off.
Right, right. So yeah, there's a bit of a difference there. All right, we got a super chat down here from Tyler Evans. Brian, thank you for the super chat, Tyler, very, very much. Brian, how was the atmosphere at the Gator Bowl? I thought it was pretty cool. Like, I mean, for a bowl game, it was pretty cool. You had a lot of South Carolina fans there tailgating. I didn't see any issues from them. It was loud, pretty cool. I mean, it's a bowl game, right? And Jacksonville's kind of a boring place anyway, in my opinion. Yeah. But Vince, I thought it was a good atmosphere. It was loud. It was pretty packed for a bowl game. It was good. I thought it was good. So thank you for the super chat, Tyler. But yeah, and the crowd was into it, man. The whole game, the crowd was into it. John A1, do the Adamiolas have another year of eligibility? Justin does. Jason does not.
Right.
So that one's pretty simple on that one. All right. Christopher Galloway with another question. Mailbag for Brian. Of the returning tight ends, who will be the better pass catcher and who will be the better blocker? I mean, Vince, I think when Eli Raridon's healthy, that's a no-brainer. He was their best blocker this year before he got hurt. Now, Mayer became their best blocker.
Right, but he wasn't.
And the way Mayer blocked later was better than the way Raridon blocked early. But when Raridon was playing, Mayer wasn't blocking very well.
Yeah.
It'll be Eli Raridon. Best pass catcher, that'll be interesting because that'll be a little bit of a duel between Raridon and Stace. Now, here's the question mark. We don't know what Eli Raridon's going to be athletically now. He may come back 100%, but he tore the same knee twice, where the difference between him and Drew Tranquill is Drew Tranquill tore each of his knees once. Eli has now torn the same knee twice. That's a big question mark for me. I got to see it come back. But if he comes back the way he was, he's got a chance to be best at both of those areas. With him being a little bit questionable, I think I look at it and say it's probably Holden there. The best all-around guy right now that I know of is Mitchell. I think Mitchell can be a good weapon in the pass game, as he showed in the bowl game. I mean, we don't talk about his touchdown, but that 3rd and 15 conversion was big too, where he found that soft spot. Then that nice little delay seam. Tyler stepped up, got him the ball. That was a pretty big moment. All right. Benjamin Weiss says, you guys think Clarence Lewis is too small for safety? Absolutely not, Vince. I don't think he's too small for safety at all.
No, I don't think he's too small. I think he's one of the. I mean, I don't. What is he measured at? Because he does
5'11" and a half.
Visually, he does not seem too small for me.
He's over 190 pounds. I mean, like size wise, he's listed at 5'11" and a half, 203. I don't know if he's 203, but he's at least 195. That's plenty big enough for safety. Now he's got to become a better tackler, a more consistent tackler, Vince. But he's got the strength to do it, and he'll be a senior next year, so he'll be bigger and stronger.
Yep.
Here's a question from ERO 5.20. Mailbag, if you are doing it, we are. Could playing nickel often and the linebackers not playing well with run fits make the defensive line look worse? No, because I think not for me, Vince, because I feel like I can differentiate between when a defensive lineman made a mistake and when a linebacker did. Right. It was just the overall lack of production at linebacker that was the problem for me. And part of it was how they were used. I mean, we've complained about that all year. They were basically used a lot of times as, block occupiers. I mean, that's just kind of what it was. And not enough to, in my opinion, to look at it from a standpoint of were you doing things to allow them to use their talent to their advantage as opposed to just allowing them to use your system.
Agreed.
That's the thing for me.
Yep.
So, yeah, that's why I was a little disappointed with how they were used. Here's one, Vince, for you. Zach Martin, Mailbag. What was your lucky jersey numbers?
Well, multiple sports. Obviously, growing up as a kid, I know you did the same thing. I'm sure it wasn't one jersey number for everything for you. Baseball, for me, it was number 11. And I attempted to do that in football, but it was occupied, and it became 21. So 11 and 21 are my numbers.
I never had a lucky number, Vince. I had a favorite number, and it was 7.
Yeah, lucky. I don't go by luck. I don't really necessarily believe
like
in
I
that,
have different numbers.
Favorites.
Yeah, like in baseball, it was always as a kid, it was always my favorite player.
Yeah.
So as a really little kid, I was 13 for Dave Concepcion, and then when he retired, I switched to 11 for Barry Larkin, right? And then my senior year of baseball, I wore number 17 because it was number 7, had a number 7 in it, right? And I wanted something a little different than football. My first, like the 8th grade year, was really my first year. I played football in 7th grade, but it was the first year I've ever played, and we had a really good quarterback, and our 8th grade team, our junior high team, went 6-1. I took over the next year. We went 7-0. I just like to point that out, that I did something Matt Best could never do, and that was beat North. But we went 7-0. I wore number 1 for that team, and then wore 7 after that. And then in high school, we didn't have a number 7, so I wore number 9. And then in college, I wore 8 as a true freshman because 7, our starting tailback, wore number 7. And then when I transferred to Salisbury, I got number 7 back. So 7 was my favorite number. I shouldn't say lucky number is my favorite number.
Yeah, I'm not going to go into my whole career, but
yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Oh, good. I don't know what else to say.
I
was 22 in middle school in football because it was 11 times 2. And then when I got to high school, 11 and 22 were taken. So 21 was the closest to that. And then it became my number all through high school.
Yeah, I get that.
But my 8th grade year, we didn't even, I played safety. So I was 22 as a safety, had the record for interceptions that stood, I think it still stands. And also we never even got scored on all year.
Mm-hmm. I still think I have the school record for touchdowns in a game. I don't think it's been passed. Maybe I had 5 in a game once. I had 4 catches and then 1 interception I took back. So I had the record for most strikeouts in a game of baseball, but my nephew swears that somebody has passed it since then. But I was like, okay, we'll see. I was like, in my defense, I only played 1 year of baseball. I set the record 4 times my senior year. Tied it twice. I'd say that's pretty good for 1 year of high school baseball, don't you?
I blame your coach for not getting you out earlier.
I know, right? Well, I played as a junior, but that's when I transferred to Florida. I was going to move to Florida. My coach.
Oh, that's right, because you weren't even. Yeah.
So I started 1 game as a junior and struck out 12. But yeah. So anyway, Josh Buffo, the motivational business banker, name your starting linebacker core in Ireland versus Navy. I'll let you try this one, Vince. I think it's a little too early for that.
It's way too early for that. Every single linebacker is
and the other thing too is it's Navy, so it may not be your starting linebacking core for game 2 and beyond.
Good point.
That's the other part of it.
Actually a really, really good point. All the linebackers are coming back, right? That we know about. Mm-hmm. They're all coming back. So
as of right now,
of right now, right?
Yeah.
So
as far as I know, that wasn't an ominous we know of someone leaving, but we're not telling you. It's like the portal's open for another 2.5 weeks. So, but I don't know of anyone that's leaving as of right now. So, So, anyway, Bill Walsh with a question here real quick. Bill Walsh says last year's bowl loss was this is a comment, excuse me. And I think it's a great comment. So I started. Bill said last year's bowl loss was a coaching meltdown. This year's bowl win was a coaching victory, very important for the program and recruiting moving forward. I think this is spot on, Bill. And that's what I brought up after the show, Vince. I wanted to point out just the dichotomy of how last year's game went compared to this year's game. I thought it was important. Where this year they found the answers.
Yeah.
Last year, when Oklahoma State took control of that game, Vince, they had no answers. No answers. This year they found answers.
Yeah.
And that was a big difference for me.
I agree.
And it's why this coaching staff, even with the issues, Vince, that this staff has and the adjustments that still need to be made, top to bottom, it's still a much better coaching staff than it was last year.
No doubt.
Much better. And the ability to run the football is the biggest difference. Tommy Rees could do things in this game that he could not do last year. And that is line up and run the football.
Yeah.
And have balance. So, I mean,
yep. Yeah, I agree completely. And we're gonna have a whole show on coaches tomorrow.
Yep.
Make sure you tune in.
It'll be we'll do that later in the week now.
Oh, okay.
Tomorrow we're gonna move it around a little bit. I'll go over that with you later.
That's fine.
But we'll do that after we do the evaluation of Marcus Freeman and all that kind of stuff. Joe Medina with a question. I wonder how the season would have played out if Buckner was healthy throughout, especially given how well the offensive line began playing. Here's my thing, Vince. they would not have lost to Stanford if Tyler Buchner was still the starter quarterback. However, I think there's a chance they could have lost to either BYU or North Carolina if Tyler Buchner was still starting quarterback. Because I felt like that team just needed something to rally around, and his injury was that. And Drew being thrust in the lineup, not because there's a love for Drew and a hate for Tyler, but it's just like, hey, we got our guy hurt. Drew's got to step in. We got to rally, and we got to have his back. And I wonder if they would have done that if Tyler doesn't get hurt. Now, once they got hot, I think they'd have stayed hot, and I think they beat USC at the end of the year. So I think there'd only been a one-game improvement if Tyler would have stayed healthy. I think they'd have beat Stanford. I think they'd have beat Clemson. I think they'd have beat USC. But I think there's a chance they would have lost an earlier game, North Carolina, BYU, something like that.
Yeah.
Compared to maybe even Cal. They might even start 0-3. Right. You know what I mean? Like, who knows? But I think North Carolina or maybe even BYU might have been a game that they'd have lost if not for that change. But I think once they figured it out, we saw – this is the most amazing thing. Tyler Buchner threw 3 interceptions, and 2 of them got returned for touchdowns, and they still beat South Carolina. Mm-hmm. Why? Because he made a ton of plays.
Yeah, he did.
And because the offensive line was able to have success and lean on him, and he could do – like the offense got going partly because you were able to get the ball outside. And we'll talk about this more tonight, but you're able to get the ball outside with your quarterback. That's something the previous team could not do.
Right.
Before before Tyler's injury.
Yeah.
And he had other running backs that he can lean on that he did not have in the first 2 games. They were all there, but the run game wasn't the same.
Right.
As it is now. Adam Blair, hey, Brian and Vince, I was wondering, since the 23 class is over, what are your early needs for the 2024 class? You know, Adam, Ryan and Sean did a show on this last week. I'll just kind of briefly give you some looks, and we'll get into this when we get more recruiting shows. Obviously, on offensive line, you need another strong – or offensive side, you need another strong receiver class, in my opinion. You've already got your quarterback. You've already got your tight end. You've already got your running back. You could maybe get another tight end. I'd like to see him get another tight end now. But, you know, your offensive line, it's going to be a smaller class. You already have Peter Jones. Receiver's the big one. You need another really – now, you don't need 4 or 5 maybe, but you need another 2 to 3 man really good receiver class. I'd say 3, but defensively, you need edge rushers in this class. You need edge rushers and safeties. That's the 2 biggest needs by far. And to me, you've already got a corner. You know, you get one more. Your linebacker, you're so loaded there.
I was going to say, I'm not saying get 0 linebackers,
I mean, look,
but
the point is that at those positions, you just keep doing what you're doing. Right. It's not a need. It's just this is what good teams do. You get another good player after another good player, right? Yeah. Like landing Aeneas Williams wasn't a need, but that's what good coaches do. You stack up studs year after year after year.
Right.
That's the key. Those positions are there now.
Yeah.
Needs to me are numbers and where you need to upgrade your talent the most, and that's safety and edge rushers.
Yep.
We have a super chat here from Tyler Evans. Thank you for that. I wish Marvin Harrison was not knocked out of the game, and does this take some heat off of Ryan Day? I actually think it adds more heat to him. They choked that game away, Vince.
Absolutely.
I mean, to me, coaching-wise, they choked that game away. You went away from what got you there when the game was on the line the most.
Right.
And you couldn't find answers. You couldn't get yourself 5 more yards when you needed 5 more yards as an offensive coach. I thought they once they got that 11-point lead, they kind of coached a little like, hold on. And you can't do that against Georgia. So I actually think this puts more heat on, because it's going to say, hey, this is what you're capable of when you play right. Where was this against Michigan? You know, where was – because if you wouldn't have choked this away against Michigan, Vince, you're playing TCU instead of Georgia in the first round. Right? That's the way I look at it. I don't know if you look at it the same way, but I think this actually ups the heat on him. So, yeah. You there? Okay. You're like looking all around and typing, and I'm not.
I was, putting something in the chat, but at the same time, I agree with you completely. There's not a whole lot. If you're wide receiver, one guy going out should not affect the way you call the game. Right. That's what I'll say.
You just signed one of the best receiver classes in the country. Yeah.
That's one guy does not take the heat off of a head coach, or should not change the way you call a game. Yes, Marvin Harrison Jr. is a really, really good wide receiver. No doubt about that. What about all the other guys that are supposedly really, really good too, and you can't get 5 yards? Come on now.
Yeah. Yeah, it was bad. They should have had that game. They should have won that game. There's no doubt about it. Vince, can we go a little past 4? We're getting close to the end. I know you got another show to prepare for, but can we go a little past 4?
Sure.
Yeah, we'll get there. All right, what's the next one? Mr. 2.0 with a question here. Do we anticipate anyone else entering the portal to leave Notre Dame during this window, or will it all be in May? I would expect some guys to jump in.
I would say yes. And that's no like inside knowledge that I have, but yes, I would say
some of the guys that won't be on the team anymore aren't leaving. Some of them are going to go on medical.
So there's not going to be like a big announcement.
Yeah, some of them are going to go on academic scholarships to, there's going to be some other things going on that are going to factor into that beyond just Yep. All right, Vince, let's get to this one for Milton Fan. With personnel going forward, what is the best defensive alignment? 3-3-5 or the 4-2-5, etc.? Like both. Let me explain it, Vince. Let me explain it.
Go ahead.
What I would like to see from Notre Dame, because the type of players I think they're recruiting now, and with NIL, I think one position that's going to be harder for Notre Dame to do is edge players. Like the Isaiah Foskey likes. You can find that a Foskey, but they can't consistently find a Foskey. What you can get a lot of are big, long Josh Burnham types at linebacker that can grow into Jordan Patelhos, Josh Burnhams, Junior Chalamakis to a degree, Preston Zinters maybe. Those long, rangy linebackers that can be sort of that hybrid Viper player, meaning in a 4-down, he can be there on the edge as a pass rusher, but he's also good enough to be stacked as a 3-3 Sam linebacker that can drop into coverage and do different things. Right. I think sort of a hybrid 4-2-5, 3-3 mix out of a 3-3 personnel is ideal, meaning 2 big ends, a nose, a Viper type that's the Josh Burnham, Jordan Patel hybrid type, and then 2 inside backers with 5 true defensive backs is ideal for me. And then you have the ability to go to a 3-4 personnel when you play teams that are more run-oriented and have a true rover there. I think that's ideally where they're going to go. Or if you can find a linebacker like a Jeremiah Wusu-Koramoah, then you can be more 3-4.
Sure.
But like base personnel, I don't want the Jack Kaisers at rover anymore in the base defense. It's got to be a guy that's more twitchy and in coverage ability and more rangier there. And if you're going to have a linebacker, it's got to be a really long guy, in my view, like a Thomas Brown from Wake Forest when Mike Elko was there. Is got to be the way to go. That's kind of how I think it should be, Vince, because I don't want to be a 3-3-5 all the time.
I don't want to be anything all the time. That's
right.
Kind of where I'm at with you.
But that's why I think that for that Viper position where you can get the Josh Burnhams and the Jordan Patelhos and the Preston Zinters and the Darius Hayeses in the 24 class, if you're able to get him, those guys are going to be a lot more accessible for Notre Dame than the Keon Keeleys.
Right.
And that's why I think that alignment and that versatility with the type of schedules they play, Vince, is why I think that personnel grouping, which at times is going to be a 3-3-5, is more beneficial. Where right now, when Notre Dame this year had to go to a 3-3-5, they had to sub personnel. They couldn't do it without subbing personnel. If you've got a Burnham and a Botelho as your Vipers, you're much more ability. You can line up on a 3-3-5 one play and a 4-2-5 the next play without changing out a single person.
Right.
And I think that's the ideal for me.
Yep, I agree.
It's the ideal scenario for me.
You have to be multiple this day and age with the way football, the different offenses you're going to see and the different packages. You have to be multiple.
Right.
And you can have a base, but you've got to be multiple.
Right.
And the ideal world, as you said, is to be able to be multiple with the same personnel.
Yeah.
That's the ideal world.
And if you're going to have a fourth linebacker, it's got to be a Jalen Snead type, a Nolan Ziegler type, not a Jack Kaiser type. It's got to be a really long, twitchy athlete that can flat out run. That's it for me. Milton Fan 15 said the most impressive play Tyler Buckner made in the bowl game. There's 2 for me, Vince.
The third down to Jaden Thomas
was unreal.
That was
like I haven't seen a quarterback make a throw like that since Jimmy Clausen.
That was
I just flat out
awesome.
Dude in his face. I don't know how he saw it.
Right.
Sidearms it with a guy hitting him in the face. Gets zip on it out to Jaden Thomas past the third. I mean, it just. How did he see it? How did he get that much zip on the ball? And how was he able to throw it accurately? It was an unreal throw.
Yep.
The second one was the touchdown pass to Braden Lentz. Did you watch that? He threw it off his back foot.
Yes, he did.
Taking a hit.
and put it right where it needed to be.
Yep.
Like,
I mean, that was impressive.
As the ball's in the air, if I'm Braden Lindsey, I'm like, where's this been all year? Where's this been all year?
Exactly.
You know,
it's been on the sideline with a broken collarbone. That's where it's been all year.
I know.
And the thing is, he got a little bit more time to throw. That was obviously part of it, which he didn't get a lot of in the regular season.
Sure.
So I just want to point out too that what's happening in the bowl game right now is why I'm so frustrated with how Notre Dame played against them. It's USC's up 42-30, but Tulane scored 30 points in the first 3 quarters because they ran the ball 25 times for 252 yards.
Yep.
And Michael Pratt's performance is why I had questions about him, even with all the God-given tools he has. He's 3 of 10 for 117 yards. When he is upped in competition, this is why you see so many kids go from big-time, low Power 5, Group of 5, or FCS to Power 5 football. A lot of them struggle because the windows are so much – even against a team like USC, the windows are still tighter than they are playing in the AAC. And that's why you also see mediocre Power 5 quarterbacks like Shane Buechele and Tanner Mordecai and guys like that go to the AAC and dominate because it's just bigger windows. It's just an easier level of football. That's just the reality of it. So thank you for that super chat, Milton fan. Joe Medina, why do you guys think some fans and podcasters value experience over talent? To me, experience should always be a separator if the competition between 2 players ends in a dead heat. Vince, I'm close to being on the same page with Joe. I think that experience can trump talent even if the talent at one guy is slightly better, because experience is going to result. But here's the thing. Experience has to be not from a experience just by itself standpoint. It's got to be experience at playing at a certain level, right? Like that's the thing for me. Like, let's just say hypothetically that, Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah comes in and is a senior, and Notre Dame gets the freshman version of Jalen Smith to play the same position. Jalen Smith's the better talent, clearly the better talent, but the experience of Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah as a senior would make him a better player than freshman version of Jalen Smith.
Correct.
Now, as sophomore, maybe not the same case. You get what I'm saying? So I use that as an extreme example to make a point because I don't know if Notre Dame's ever really been in that type of situation. But to your point, Joe, I think Notre Dame's got to do a better job of right now on both sides of the ball, especially on defense right now, though, of getting the younger players ready to play.
Yes.
Now, I know Benjamin Morrison was a freshman All-American, and I get all that. But that was one guy at one position that we all believe is extremely well coached and with Mike Mickens. For all the crap Tommy Rees takes about doesn't get young, they just put up 45 points and 558 yards with 8 starters that were true sophomores, right? Their best players all season, for the most part, outside of Michael Merritt, were sophomores, right? And they did pretty well. And so defensively, however, the fact that you couldn't get the young linebackers going, the fact that you couldn't get Jaden Mickey to play better because of how you used him, like, to me, that was a play calling problem, not his ability standpoint. Like, that was more of a coaching problem than it, from a Golden thing than it was him being developed. The fact that you couldn't get your defensive, Josh Burnham to get any kind of playing time this year is a coaching problem to me. So yeah, that's got to get more value. But I also think sometimes fans can underappreciate experience.
Yes, absolutely.
I do believe that.
Right.
And that's why I don't put J.D. Bertrand and Maris Luafau on the same stage, because J.D. Bertrand, for the most part, was a really good player this year. He just had some lapses where you're like, dude, what are you doing? But part of me, I view that as a coaching problem that just plugging in a young player doesn't fix. That was the whole complaint we had all year on defense. Look, just putting Prince Colley and Jalen Sneed and Nolan Ziegler out there doesn't fix anything.
No.
Because the system is the problem. Now, Jack Kaiser has showed when you use Jack Kaiser correctly, he's really good.
Right.
He's just not an every down linebacker, in my opinion. J.D. Bertrand is. Maris Luafau's the same way. You try to turn Maris Luafau into something he's not because he has experience. Well, the experience can equal great production. And so that's why there should have been a difference there. So I think, there's the mistake you can make on the Joe Schmidt side. J.D. Bertrand's not Joe Schmidt.
No.
J.D. Bertrand's a much better player than Joe Schmidt was. But then there's experience you can make on a Maris Luafau side where it's like, dude, this guy, I get that this guy's good and all that, but the reality is, you're putting a little bit too much on the experience thing.
Yep.
So I'm with you on that to a degree, Joe, but honestly what it comes down to is
it's case by case.
There's a lack of courage at times to go with the unknown when you know what you're going to get. Yeah. That's what it boils down to for me, Vince. It's look, when your job is on the line, I'm going to go with what I know.
Yeah, I get that.
But see, that's why you don't win. Right? Like that, not you generally speaking. That's why you don't win. Like in general, people.
Yeah.
Right. You're like, no, didn't mean you, Vince.
Call me a loser.
No. It's like, that's why, like making the decision to, do certain things, to go with Tua in the halftime of the championship game instead of Jalen Hurts, who had more experience and it took you to a championship game the year before.
Sure.
Right. Like, to me, making the decision to go away from Kelly Bryant and switch to Trevor Lawrence. Right. Like, I mean, sometimes you think it's a no-brainer, but there's coaches who wouldn't make that move. Yeah. I don't think Brian Kelly would have made that move. And so, to me, it's just it's a lack of courage, in my opinion, to say, hey, look, I'm going to take a risk here by playing this younger guy because I know what I'm getting over here. And, I think that's what separates the Mike Mickenses from the Al Washingtons and the Mike Mickenses from the Al Goldens right now. It's like Mike Mickens pounded on the table and said, we got to get 20 on the field.
Right.
And he did. And he was phenomenal. But they put him in a position where his skill set was suited. They didn't do that with Jaden Mickey. And
that's true, too.
That's kind of an issue. Milton Fan with a super chat. Thank you very much, Milton Fan. If Hartman transfers in and loses to Tyler Buckner, does that deter future transfer players coming to Notre Dame? Maybe. I mean, we'll address that when we kind of get close to it, but I would say probably quarterback. But it also is a good thing for Notre Dame if that happens.
I was going to say, and here's the other thing. If Tyler Buckner beats out Hartman or whoever comes in to, as a transfer,
he's going to be a Heisman contender next year if that happens, man.
That's what I'm saying. Like, and if you look at who's coming in behind Buckner, we all think that Kenny Minchie, CJ Carr, like Notre Dame's not looking for any transfer quarterbacks anytime soon. So, okay. I mean, I think that's a chance that you take. I really do.
Now, I don't think that happens. Right. I don't think that happens. I don't think that this happens. If Sam Hartman comes, I don't think he's going to get beat out by Tyler Buckner, barring injury. But I'm just saying if it happens, then that's kind of why I see it. So that's, but I think that's a good thing. It's a good thing when your talented players step up and play to their potential.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yep. That's kind of how I look at it. All right. Did you see the comment look at the comment from Big Jim at 405. I'm not bringing it up on the chat, but just look at it, Vince. Crystal Rose says, do you see Harbaugh leaving for the NFL if a team wants him? I do. I think Jim Harbaugh.
I think he would have left before and they didn't want him. That's why he didn't leave. I think he absolutely leaves if the NFL wants him. I don't know.
Leave for the right job. I don't think he's going to take just any job. I think he wants to go somewhere that there's some level of track record of that they will be like, even like the Broncos. The Broncos have been mentioned. I could see Jim Harbaugh taking that job because even though the Broncos stink right now, there is some history of the Broncos being successful. Sure. They'll do what it takes to win. Blah 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 blah. Veteran quarterback. Et
well, the Colts don't have a head coach yet. Right. I mean, there's a chance there.
See that one? He played there too.
Right.
I mean, that's,
100%.
So, yeah, I could see that. Yeah, I think Jim Harbaugh wants to go in the NFL. I mean, dude, if he had his bags all but packed, he was telling people last year he was leaving. So, it's kind of hard for me to say he doesn't want to coach at that level when he's made it very clear to anyone that will listen that he wants to coach at that level. So I just, I have a hard time with that one, Vince.
Yeah.
I think that would be one where I could see him taking that one. I could. And look, and if he did take that job, he's going to have a top 5 pick most likely. They're going to have a chance for either CJ Stroud or Bryce Young. I don't know how he'd feel about those guys, or if he'd want to go trade for a veteran guy or something like that. Hey, we'll trade you Russell Wilson.
I don't think his stock is quite as high.
Yeah, don't think so. Don't think you're going to get back what you gave up to get him. I'm pretty sure that's the case.
Don't think so.
So dumb. Somebody, Jay Wick asked me, do I have a preference, Brian, between Buckner and Hartman? I don't. I want the guy that's going to give them the best chance to compete for a championship next year.
100%.
Flat out. If it's Sam Hartman, great. If it's Tyler Buckner, great. I just think Tyler Buckner's probably going to be a guy that you're going to look to say, can we get that year back? Because here's the thing about Tyler Buckner's 2022 season. It's a redshirt season.
Mm-hmm.
He started 3 games, but it's a redshirt season. because he only played 3 games. So he's going to go into next year with still 3 seasons of eligibility remain. A perfect world scenario for Notre Dame is Sam Hartman comes in and he is what you hope he is, right? And he goes out and does great, and then Tyler's able to kind of develop, get his body stronger, and then he starts for 2 more years. That's one scenario. The other scenario is that Tyler Buchner is just so good that he's that guy. But here's my concern, however. Let me explain something to people, and we'll dive more into this if this decision happens. What y'all have to understand is here's a question we got to ask a lot. Do you think Sam Hartman reconsiders now that Buchner played well? And I'm like, first of all, let's not ignore the fact that Sam Hartman just watched Tyler Buchner throw 2 pick sixes and 3 interceptions total. Like, let's not pretend that didn't happen, right? For the homers that just won't only focus on the good. For the negative people that only want to focus on the interceptions, like what you saw in that game outside of 5 or 6 plays is why people are so high on Tyler Buchner. Mm-hmm. That dude makes plays that just look, some of the plays he made, there's only a small handful of quarterbacks in the country that can make some of those plays. There's just not many, right? There just aren't. Like the throw to Jaden Thomas, there's just not a lot of quarterbacks that can make that play. And that's the excitement, right? But the problem is Notre Dame is not looking to get a transfer quarterback because they don't have faith in Tyler Buchner's talent. The problem is he beats out Sam Hartman. He starts 5 games. He's a Heisman contender, and boom, his season's over because of an injury. That's the concern.
Correct.
That's the danger.
Yeah.
That's why they're out there looking for a guy. Now, if he beats him out, okay, whatever. I mean, let's not forget Max Duggan got beat out to start the season at TCU, right? So I just feel like that's the situation that I think we're going to see. I don't care who it is, though. If Tyler Buchner reaches his full potential this offseason and next year events, great, and stays healthy, great.
Yeah.
Awesome. Notre Dame's going to be hard to beat.
You know what? At the end of the day, I want Notre Dame to win games.
Right.
Like
if Sam Hartman's that guy and he can lead this offense the way Tom Rees wants it, great. I want Notre Dame to win. I love Tyler Buchner as a player. I just want them to win.
Yeah.
Take a receiver. I think Tobias Merriweather can be a stud. But if he's their 5th or 6th best receiver next year, fine.
Okay.
Whatever. I don't care. I just want him to win.
Right.
That's the key.
Yep,
I just want him to win.
With you. I want wins. I want national championships. I want all of those things that come with winning. That's what I want.
It's a fair question from Jay Wick. It's a very fair question. It just here's what let's say the running back thing. You have the Team Aldrich people and the Team Logan people and it's like nobody. It's like, oh, Aldrich should be the guy. What was wrong with how they used the running backs against South Carolina?
Right.
Aldrich should have carried the ball more. Why? How did that not work? You know what I mean? It's like even like the Clemson game. Oh, Aldrich needs to be the guy. He needs to be this. And I'm like, did you watch the same game I watched? Because who was their leading rusher in that game? It wasn't Aldrich. It was Logan. You know what I mean? Like it just is one of those things. Why can't you enjoy that they're both really freaking good and they're going to ride the hot hand in that game? But it's like people got to get into this. No, I'm team so-and-so. If you're a Drew Pine guy, you're going to do nothing but rip Tyler Buchner apart. Like we have someone in the chat that just literally can never say a nice thing about Tyler Buchner. Right. And when we're having a show that has nothing to do with Tyler Buchner, we'll still constantly talk about Tyler Buchner all the time, right? And it's like, why can't we say that we want him to be as good as he can be? And if somebody else better, great. Because it's all about Notre Dame winning a championship. And that's my problem with too many people. Is there's too many people that they get on team so-and-so instead of saying you should be on team Notre Dame. And as long as whatever's doing is working, then let's do it. And if it's not working, then we can be critical. But it's not. I didn't enjoy it as much because I was team Estime. And Logan Diggs did they win? Did the offense play as good as it could have? Then, hey, it worked. If your team Diggs and Aldrich goes out there and rips off, they should have played Logan. They won. It worked.
Yep.
Right? Next week, it'll be Logan's turn. The week after that's Aldrich's turn. The week after that, it's Tyree. The week after that's Jerome Price. Did they win all their games or not? That's what I care about. That's all I care about.
That's it.
And what's I don't like the 3-3-5, but I can see merit to it as a football coach with the right personnel to working. Right? You can't stop Michigan's run game with a 3-3-5. Well, worked pretty freaking good for TCU on Saturday after the first play of the game. They went for 186, right? 54 of that came on the first play of the game, and most of it in the second half was scrambles. They couldn't run the ball on TCU.
Yeah.
Can't do it in 3-3-5. They didn't adjust. This is who we are. We're going to game plan you. That's not what I would go with. But as long as it works, Vince, I don't care.
Right.
I don't care.
Right, exactly.
You know?
TCU looked pretty good defensively against Michigan. There's no doubt about that.
Right.
So good that one of my friends said that's one of the best defenses in the country. Well, that's
TCU?
Yeah. It's like, no, they're 56. Okay. But other than that,
Yeah. Let's pump the brakes a little bit on that one. All right. Unbelievable. Some people, man, I tell you.
Yeah, I know.
Anyway, so that's going to do it for today's show, everybody. Thank you all so much for today's show. Vince, you'll be back at 6 o'clock. You're going to have a lot of Vince today.
Yeah.
6 o'clock, he's got IB Nation Sports Talk with Sean Stiers. And then 8 o'clock, Vince and I are going to do a Upon Further Review, breaking down the bowl game. So we'll talk about a lot of that good stuff. And then tomorrow we'll be back at it talking about Notre Dame football. It's going to be me and Vince at 1 o'clock every day this week. Y'all are going to love it. We're going to end it with a mailbag on Friday. So very, very excited about that. So before you leave, folks, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell, sign up for the message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. Make sure you're always checking out the front page at irishbreakdown.com. And, of course, give us a 5-star review. We would greatly appreciate it. If you could also, pretty please, subscribe to the CFB Nation channel. We would also appreciate that very much and be ready to listen to those guys' shows. You get the Lucky Lefty podcast there, CFB All-America show, the state of recruiting. We're going to start putting more of our stuff on that platform as well when we talk some more national college football stuff, which will be a lot of fun. So definitely want to make sure you subscribe to that as well. So for Vince, I'm Brian. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll talk to you again tonight, 8 o'clock Eastern, Upon Further Review, me and Vince on the Irish Breakdown podcast.